I postponed my wedding twice to raise a boy who was not mine. I paid the emergency room bills, stayed awake through the night terrors, and watched his biological mother vanish into the overseas party scene. Today, standing at the altar in a white dress, I was finally marrying a man who loved us both. Then the heavy oak doors of the venue swung open. She marched down the aisle of white hydrangeas with a lawyer by her side, pointed a manicured finger at the 5-year-old holding my fiancé's leg, and demanded her son back. My mother smiled when she saw her. No one wanted her at that wedding, except them. My name is Chloe. I am 32 years old, working as a wealth management advisor in Chicago. Before I tell you how a wedding crashed by an estranged sister turned into a federal fraud case, tell me where you are watching from in the comments below. Hit like and subscribe if you believe blood does not make someone a parent. The string quartet had just finished playing. I stood under a floral arch next to Marcus. Marcus is a cybersecurity executive, a man whose calm demeanor always balances my constant planning. He placed his hand on my shoulder. At his feet, 5-year-old Leo adjusted his tiny tuxedo jacket. Then came the noise. The heavy wooden doors at the back of the chapel slammed against the walls. 150 heads turned. I expected a late guest. I did not expect Harper. My younger sister wore a silk slip dress that looked better suited for a nightclub than a midday ceremony. Beside her stood a man in a gray suit holding a leather briefcase. Harper had not called or sent a postcard in 5 years. She missed Leo's first steps, his first words, and his asthma diagnosis. I stepped forward, preparing to signal the venue security. But before I could speak, motion from the front row caught my eye. My mother, Beverly, did not gasp. She did not look confused. She stood up, smoothed the skirt of her navy dress, and walked right past me. Beverly opened her arms and pulled Harper into a tight embrace. The silence in the room was suffocating. Guests stared at each other. Marcus tightened his grip on my hand. "She is here to receive what belongs to her," my mother announced to the crowd. Her voice carried no trace of embarrassment. It held pride. Harper pulled away from the hug. She did not look at me. She did not look at Marcus. Her eyes locked onto the little boy hiding behind Marcus's leg. Leo gripped the fabric of his trousers, burying his face. "Hand him over," Chloe Harper said. Her tone lacked any maternal warmth. "You kept him long enough. It is time for him to come home with his real mother." I looked at the man in the gray suit. He stepped forward, pulling a thick stack of papers from his briefcase. He held it up like a weapon. The top page bore a red county seal. He introduced himself as Attorney Trent Sterling. He did not lower his voice. "We have an emergency custody order signed by a judge this morning." Marcus stepped in front of Leo, shielding the boy entirely. He looked at Trent. "You have 3 seconds to leave this property before I have you arrested for trespassing." Trent smirked. "Call the police and they will take the child. The choice is yours." Marcus did not raise his voice. He did not posture or issue threats. He simply reached down, lifted Leo into his arms, and turned to the crowd of stunned guests. He asked everyone to remain seated and enjoy the music. Then he looked at Trent and my sister. He told them to step into the bridal suite down the hall. If they wanted a discussion, it would happen behind closed doors. He made it clear that if they caused a scene in front of our friends, colleagues, and family members, the police would arrive to escort them off the property. Trent nodded. As an attorney, he knew the optics of wrestling a screaming child away in front of a chapel full of witnesses would not play well in front of any judge. He motioned for Harper and my mother to follow. The walk down the corridor felt endless. The heavy silk of my wedding gown rustled against the floorboards. I focused on the sound to keep my hands from shaking. Marcus walked beside me. Leo buried his face in Marcus's shoulder, his small hands gripping the lapels of the custom tuxedo. The boy was terrified. He had never seen Harper before in his conscious memory. To him, she was just a loud stranger who had interrupted a day he had been excited about for months. The bridal suite smelled of hairspray, expensive roses, and anxious anticipation. A half-empty bottle of champagne sat on the marble vanity next to discarded makeup brushes. The room was designed for celebration and joy. Now it felt like an interrogation cell. Marcus stood near the large bay window, keeping his body positioned between Leo and the intruders. I stood in the center of the room, acting as a human shield between my new family and the people I used to call my own. Harper did not waste a second. As soon as the door clicked shut, she began pacing the room. She ran a hand through her hair and let out a dramatic, breathy sigh. She looked at me with an expression that simulated deep exhaustion and unearned wisdom. Postpartum depression is a recognized medical condition, Chloe. She spoke the words like a rehearsed script, emphasizing every syllable for maximum sympathetic impact. I needed time to heal. I needed time to find myself again. I am the mother. You are the older sister. It was your duty to step in when I could not function. Duty. The word echoed in the quiet room, bouncing off the floral arrangements. My mind flashed back through the past 5 years. She called her absence healing. I called it abandoning a newborn. While she was busy finding herself, she made sure to document every single moment on social media. I saw her posing on yachts in Dubai. I watched her sip expensive cocktails in front of the Eiffel Tower. She checked into luxury wellness resorts in Mykonos and partied in Tulum. She never sent a single dollar for diapers. She never asked how her son was doing. Meanwhile, I was the one sitting on hard plastic chairs in the emergency room at 2 a.m. When Leo developed severe asthma at age 3, I spent my savings on nebulizers, hospital bills, and specialist visits. I postponed this wedding twice. I lost thousands of dollars in non-refundable venue deposits because Leo caught a severe respiratory virus the week before my original date. Marcus stayed by my side through every hospital stay. He learned how to administer breathing treatments. He learned which songs calmed Leo down when his chest hurt. He became the father Leo never had. Harper was busy attending fashion weeks and posting sponsored content. I looked at her silk slip dress, her fresh tan, and her flawless manicure. You did not have postpartum depression, Harper. You had buyer's remorse. You realized a baby ruined your aesthetic and your social calendar, so you dropped him on my porch with a diaper bag and vanished. My mother stepped forward immediately, her face flushed red with indignation. "How dare you speak to your sister that way, Chloe?" She came back. "That is what matters. She is ready to be a mother now. You should be grateful she trusted you with her child. You should be packing his bags instead of putting up a fight. Grateful. My mother wanted me to be grateful for being used as an unpaid nanny and a financial safety net for half a decade." I looked at Beverly. This was the woman who missed my college graduation because she needed to take Harper shopping for a vacation wardrobe. This was the woman who never once offered to babysit Leo because it interfered with her weekly card games and social events. Now she stood shoulder to shoulder with the daughter who deserted her grandson, defending her honor. "I am not giving you my son," I said. My voice remained remarkably steady. I kept my posture straight, drawing on years of experience facing down difficult clients in wealth management meetings. "He does not know you. He does not recognize your face. He thinks you are a crazy woman crashing a party." Harper stopped pacing. She did not yell. She did not argue back or try to defend her maternal instincts. Instead, she smirked. It was a cold, calculated expression that made my stomach turn. She glanced at the lawyer standing silently near the door. Trent stepped forward. He did not try to negotiate or appeal to my emotions. He walked straight to the marble makeup vanity and tossed the thick stack of papers onto the surface. The documents landed with a heavy thud next to my bridal bouquet. "We are not here to ask for your permission, Miss Evans." Trent tapped a manicured finger against the top page. He pointed directly to the bright red stamp from the county court. "This is an emergency guardianship mandate. It grants immediate physical custody of the minor child to his biological mother, Harper Evans." I stared at the red ink. My heart hammered against my ribs, but my mind shifted into a clinical, analytical gear. In wealth management, I deal with court orders, trusts, and estate transfers every single day. I read legal language for a living. I know how the family court system operates. A judge does not grant an ex parte emergency custody order just because a biological mother changes her mind and decides she wants to play parent after a 5-year absence. Emergency orders bypass standard hearings. They are granted without giving the other party a chance to be present or defend themselves. They are only issued under one specific circumstance: imminent danger. A judge only signs a document like that if they are convinced the child will suffer severe immediate harm if left in their current environment. Marcus shifted his weight. As a cybersecurity executive, he spent his career analyzing threats and dismantling them logically. He did not panic, but I could see the rigid line of his jaw. He kept one hand firmly on Leo's back, a silent promise of protection. He looked at the lawyer with calculating eyes. You walked into a private event with a piece of paper you expect us to accept at face value, Marcus said. His tone was low, smooth, and dangerous. You expect my fiancé to hand over a child she has raised since infancy because you threw a document on a table. Trent adjusted his tie, unbothered by the hostility. I expect you to follow the law. The court has spoken. If you refuse to comply with this order, you are in direct violation of a judicial mandate. That is a criminal offense. I can have law enforcement here in 10 minutes. I imagine a bride being escorted out of her own wedding in handcuffs would be quite a spectacle. Harper crossed her arms, looking smug. Let us make this easy, Chloe. Tell Leo to come to me. Do not make a scene and traumatize the boy. You have done enough damage to him already. Damage. The word struck me like a physical blow. I had sacrificed my 20s, my savings, and my freedom to ensure this boy had a safe, loving home. I had wiped away his tears when he asked why he did not have a mom like the other kids at preschool. I had told him he was loved, wanted, and cherished every single day of his life. And now the woman who created that trauma was accusing me of causing it. I looked back down at the document. I needed to see exactly what lies had been told to secure this order. I reached out and picked up the heavy stack of papers. My hands felt numb, but my vision focused sharply on the black text. I flipped past the first page, past the standard legal boilerplate, searching for the affidavit. In my line of work, I have seen clients try to manipulate assets using false documents. I have seen siblings fight over estates with bitter lies. But family court is different. A judge required a sworn statement to sign an emergency order. They needed a witness to testify under penalty of perjury that the child was in immediate peril. Without a witness, the order was nothing more than a request. With a witness, it became a legal weapon. I found the page. I scanned the paragraphs, reading the horrific accusations printed in stark, cold letters. The document claimed the child was subjected to frequent physical and emotional abuse. It claimed the child was living in a hostile, dangerous environment, unfit for human development. It claimed I was using the boy as a tool for emotional manipulation, holding him hostage from his rightful mother. But the accusations were not the worst part. The worst part was the signature at the bottom of the page, the signature of the person who swore under oath that these lies were the truth. I stopped breathing. The air in the bridal suite felt suddenly thin, insufficient to fill my lungs. Someone had fabricated a story so damaging that a judge felt compelled to act without a hearing. I looked up from the papers. My eyes darted from Trent to Harper and finally rested on my mother. The conflict had just crossed a line I never thought possible. I stared at the third page of the legal document resting in my hands. The heavy bond paper felt rough against my fingertips. The text was printed in stark black ink, but my eyes locked onto the bottom right corner. A signature written in blue ballpoint pen sat neatly on the designated line. The cursive letters looped with a familiar, elegant slant. It was a signature I had seen on my elementary school report cards, on birthday checks, and on holiday greeting cards. Now that same familiar handwriting validated a fabricated nightmare. I forced my eyes back up to read the paragraphs above the signature line. The words jumped off the page like physical strikes. Severe physical discipline, unexplained bruising, emotional manipulation, a hostile domestic environment. The document was a sworn affidavit. The affiant stated under penalty of perjury that Chloe Evans and Marcus Hayes posed an immediate daily threat to the physical safety and mental well-being of the minor child. I lowered the document. The rustle of the thick paper sounded deafening in the quiet bridal suite. I looked across the room at the woman who gave birth to me. Beverly stood near the marble vanity mirror, adjusting the gold chain of her designer handbag. She did not look away. She did not lower her gaze in shame. Her chin tilted upward, carrying a defiant, unwavering arrogance. "I testified for your sister," Beverly said. Her voice cut through the room, sharp and devoid of any hesitation. She spoke as if she had just returned an unsatisfactory item to a high-end department store, not as if she had just committed a felony against her own flesh and blood. I stood frozen in my white gown. "You told a judge that Marcus and I beat Leo," I asked, keeping my tone deadly flat to mask the tremor in my chest. "The judge needed a witness to issue the emergency mandate," Beverly continued. She smoothed an invisible wrinkle from her navy dress. "They needed someone who had been inside your home, someone who could verify that you use excessive force on the boy. I told the magistrate you kept him locked in his room to control Harper. I told them you hit him when he cried for his real mother. A cold wave washed over me, freezing the blood in my veins. My mother had driven to a county courthouse, placed her hand on a Bible, and sworn to a judge that I tortured the child I had sacrificed my entire youth to protect. She had to sit in a room with a lawyer, draft a narrative, read the horrific accusations, and sign her name in front of a notary public. This was not a heat-of-the-moment lie shouted during a family argument. This was premeditated treason. This was the Beverly Evans playbook elevated to a monstrous new tier. Growing up, there was always a distinct, undeniable hierarchy in our household. Whenever Harper made a mistake, Beverly smoothed it over with a checkbook and a lie. When 17-year-old Harper wrecked my father's sedan while driving under the influence, Beverly told the insurance investigator the brakes had failed. When Harper emptied my early college savings account to fund a disastrous startup venture that folded in 3 weeks, Beverly told me family shares everything and explicitly forbade me from filing a police report. Harper was the untouchable golden child. I was the designated shock absorber expected to cushion every single impact Harper caused. But this situation was no longer about absorbing a financial hit or losing a vehicle. My mother was not just favoring her youngest daughter. She was actively trying to send me to a state penitentiary. She was willing to brand me a child abuser and destroy my career in wealth management just to give her favorite child what she wanted. Beside me, I felt Marcus stiffen. He did not say a word, but the shift in his posture was unmistakable. As a corporate cybersecurity executive, Marcus operated in a world of logic, threat assessment, and risk mitigation. But as a black man in America, hearing a wealthy white woman casually admit to framing him for violent child abuse triggered a very specific, deeply ingrained survival instinct. A false police report regarding physical violence involving a child could ruin his life overnight. It could put him in the back of a squad car facing aggressive prosecution before anyone bothered to ask for his side of the story. Beverly knew exactly what she was doing. She was weaponizing the justice system against both of us. "You committed perjury," I stated. I took a step forward, closing the distance between us. "You lied to a family court judge. Do you have any idea what the legal penalty is for submitting a fraudulent affidavit to secure an ex parte order?" Harper scoffed, stepping closer to her lawyer. "It is not a lie if it saves my son from a bitter, controlling spinster," Harper said. "You were always jealous of me, Chloe. You took my boy because you could never build a real life of your own. You used my postpartum struggles to play savior. Now you are trying to scare our mother because you know you have lost." Beverly crossed her arms, looking at me with distinct distaste. "Do not try to use your fancy financial jargon to intimidate me, Chloe. I did what a mother has to do." Harper was finally ready to rebuild her life. She needed her son back to feel whole again. "You were being stubborn and selfish, refusing to return him quietly when she asked last month. You forced my hand. I simply provided the court with the narrative they required to expedite the process. The judge believed me because I am the grandmother. Who would doubt a grandmother trying to save her grandson from a dangerous household? She actually believed her own twisted logic. Beverly viewed the legal system as just another customer service desk she could manipulate to get Harper a refund on a choice she regretted. She felt untouchable. The sheer audacity of her actions removed the last remaining shred of daughterly affection I held in my heart. The woman standing across from me was no longer family. She was a hostile threat to my freedom, my fiancé, and my son's safety. Trent, the gray-suited lawyer, cleared his throat. He seemed annoyed by the family drama playing out in front of him. He checked his silver wristwatch, tapping his leather shoe against the hardwood floor. He did not care about the perjury, the moral decay, or the broken family dynamics. He only cared about executing his job and collecting his billable hours. "This discussion is over," Trent announced, projecting his voice across the bridal suite. He stepped past Harper, invading my personal space. "The origins of the affidavit are irrelevant at this moment. A sitting judge reviewed the evidence and signed the mandate. The document in your hand is an active, enforceable order from the county court. You will hand the child over to my client right now." He pointed a manicured finger toward the door. "If you resist, I will contact dispatch. The police will arrive, they will view this verified order, and they will arrest you for custodial interference and child endangerment based on the sworn testimony of the grandmother." Trent shifted his gaze toward Marcus, glaring at the man shielding the terrified boy. "And if your fiancé tries to intervene, he will face felony obstruction charges. You have 1 minute to say your goodbyes, Miss Evans. Do not make this harder than it needs to be." He thought he had backed me into an inescapable corner. He thought throwing legal terminology and police threats at a bride would break my resolve and force me into submission. But as Trent shoved his hand into his suit pocket to grab his cell phone, my eyes caught the bold letterhead printed at the very top of the emergency order in my hand. It was the name of his law firm, Sterling and Associates. Below the large black font sat a smaller, highly specific subtitle describing his legal specialty. It was a specialty that made absolutely no sense in a standard family court custody dispute. A sudden, sharp realization cut through the chaos in my mind, shifting the entire battlefield. Trent checked his silver wristwatch with a sharp flick of his wrist. He let out a long breath, projecting the manufactured impatience of a man whose billable hours cost more than most people earned in a month. He adjusted the lapels of his tailored gray suit and looked at me with cold, flat eyes. He did not see a mother defending her child. He saw an obstacle standing between him and a closed case. "This mandate is effective immediately, Miss Evans." His voice held the rigid cadence of rehearsed intimidation. "You will surrender the minor child to my client right now. If you refuse, I will step into that hallway and instruct the venue coordinator to dial dispatch. I will request an armed police presence. When uniform officers arrive, they will read this order. They will place you in handcuffs right there in your wedding gown. You will be booked into the county jail for custodial interference and resisting a judicial directive." He took a step closer, crowding my space, attempting to use his height as physical leverage. "Your perfect day will end in the back of a squad car. The local news will publish your mugshot. You will lose your career, your reputation, and ultimately you will still lose the boy. Give him to Harper. Save yourself the humiliation." Trent expected me to break. He expected the threat of a public arrest to shatter my resolve. In his mind, I was just a panicking bride, a woman overly attached to a nephew terrified of a ruined aesthetic and a public scandal. He anticipated tears, begging, and eventual submission. But Trent made a critical error. He assumed I was a civilian who shrank in the face of legal jargon. He did not bother to research his opponent. I am a senior wealth management advisor at a prominent Chicago firm. My entire professional existence revolves around scrutinizing legal documents, identifying hidden liabilities, and protecting high-net-worth clients from predatory litigation. I read asset transfer agreements, trust formations, and corporate contracts for breakfast. I have sat across boardroom tables from ruthless hedge fund managers and corporate raiders. I know how to spot a bluff. More importantly, I know how to read the fine print. The initial wave of panic receded, replaced by a glacial, analytical calm. I did not look at Trent's face. I looked down at the emergency custody order still resting in my hands. I moved past the fraudulent affidavit my mother had signed. I ignored the red county stamp. I focused my eyes on the very top of the first page. Every legal document filed in a United States court requires the submitting law firm to list their contact information in the header. The bold serif font spelled out Sterling and Associates. But it was the secondary line of text beneath the firm name that caught my attention and stopped the blood in my veins. Probate and estate law. I stared at those 4 words. My mind began processing the information at lightning speed, connecting isolated data points into a terrifying, cohesive picture. In the American legal system, attorneys specialize. Family law attorneys handle divorces, child support, and custody battles. They live in family court. Probate and estate lawyers do not touch custody disputes. They handle wills, trusts, post-mortem asset distribution, and inheritance taxes. They deal exclusively with dead people and the money they leave behind. An elite probate lawyer like Trent did not wake up on a Saturday morning draft, a fraudulent ex parte emergency custody order, and march into a wedding venue out of the goodness of his heart to reunite a mother with her estranged son. Estate lawyers charge astronomical retainers. Harper had not held a steady job in 5 years. She lived on credit cards and whatever cash she could siphon from our mother. Beverly was comfortable, but she did not possess the kind of liquid capital required to keep a shark like Trent on retainer for a weekend ambush, which meant Trent was not here to litigate family bonds. He was here on a collection mission. He was here for an asset. I lifted my gaze from the paper. I looked at my sister. Harper stood near the vanity mirror, her arms crossed tight against her chest. She was not looking at Leo. She was not making cooing noises or trying to soothe the terrified 5-year-old boy hiding behind Marcus. Her eyes darted toward the door, then to her phone, then to Trent. She looked like a woman waiting for a wire transfer to clear, not a mother desperate to hold her flesh and blood. The pieces snapped together with a sickening clarity. Harper did not want a child. Harper wanted what the child represented. My heart pounded a steady rhythmic drumbeat against my ribs. A child was a legal minor. A minor could not manage their own finances. If a minor inherited a significant sum of money, the state required a legal guardian to act as a fiduciary controlling those funds until the child turned 18. The guardian would have direct access to the accounts to cover living expenses, housing, and educational needs. In the wrong hands, a guardianship was a blank check. "You are not a family law attorney," I stated. The bridal suite fell dead silent. The sudden shift in my tone caught Trent off guard. His arrogant posture faltered for a fraction of a second. I stepped forward, holding the document up, pointing a manicured nail directly at his firm's letterhead. "I manage private wealth portfolios for a living, Mr. Sterling. I interact with estate lawyers every single week. You deal in probate. You deal in trusts, asset reallocation, and inheritance disputes. You do not litigate emergency custody." Trent narrowed his eyes. "My firm handles a variety of civil matters, Miss Evans. My specialty is irrelevant to the validity of a judge's signature. Your specialty is the only thing that matters in this room." I fired back, my voice gaining strength and echoing off the walls. "You did not draft this order because Harper had a sudden maternal awakening. You drafted it because there is a financial catalyst. Probate lawyers chase money." I turned my attention to my mother. Beverly stood rigid, her knuckles turning white as she gripped her handbag. I watched the slight tremor in her jaw. She had perjured herself. She had risked federal prison time to help Harper secure physical custody today. Why today? Why interrupt a wedding in front of 150 guests instead of filing a standard petition on a Tuesday morning because time was running out? Because an event had occurred, a trigger in an estate plan or a sudden death, that required Harper to have physical possession of Leo immediately to claim a payout. "What died?" I asked, keeping my gaze locked on my sister. Harper flinched. The color drained from her cheeks, leaving her designer spray tan looking hollow and artificial. She opened her mouth, but no sound came out. I stepped closer to her, the heavy silk of my wedding dress sweeping across the floor. "You abandoned this boy half a decade ago. You ignored his birthdays. You blocked my phone number when I asked you to help pay for his asthma medication. Now you show up with an estate lawyer and a perjured document demanding immediate custody. What happened, Harper? Who died and left him money?" Trent stepped between us, holding up a hand. "We are not conducting a deposition, Miss Evans. You are stalling. Hand over the boy or I make the call." He reached into his suit pocket, pulling out a sleek black smartphone. He unlocked the screen, holding his thumb over the dial pad. He wanted me to panic. He wanted the threat of police sirens to override my logic. But as Trent prepared to dial, Marcus moved. My fiancé stepped away from the window, gently guiding Leo to stand behind the heavy velvet drapes, shielding him from the tension in the room. Marcus walked toward the center of the bridal suite. He did not look at Trent. He looked directly at Harper. As a man who spent his life infiltrating secured networks and analyzing digital footprints, Marcus had already seen the cracks in their armor. The timing of their ambush was not a mystery to him. It was a data point, and Marcus had already run the query. Marcus stepped into the center of the room. He moved with the deliberate, unhurried grace of a man entirely comfortable navigating high-stakes conflict. In his role overseeing cybersecurity architecture for a major tech firm, Marcus analyzed anomalies. He hunted for irregularities and code tracking deviations that signaled a breach. Now, he was applying that exact same analytical framework to human behavior. He stopped a few feet away from Harper. He did not raise his voice or attempt to intimidate her physically. His calm demeanor was far more unnerving than a shouted threat. "Harper," Marcus began. His tone was smooth, devoid of any visible anger. "Let us examine the timeline. You have been entirely absent for 5 years. 1,825 days. During that window, you never sent a birthday card. You never scheduled a FaceTime call, yet you chose to execute a hostile custody retrieval on this exact day, Saturday the 14th. Harper stiffened, crossing her arms defensively over her silk dress. She lifted her chin, attempting to project maternal outrage. I chose today because this is the day my sister decided to finalize her new life. I could not stand by and let my son watch another man take the place of his real family. I will not allow my child to call a stranger dad. It was a decent performance. It contained the right mix of indignation and faux emotional distress. A casual observer might have found it compelling. But Marcus was not a casual observer. Marcus let a small, razor-sharp smile touch the corner of his mouth. He reached into the inner pocket of his tuxedo jacket and withdrew his smartphone. He unlocked the screen with a swift swipe of his thumb. "That is a fascinating narrative," Marcus said, keeping his eyes locked on my sister. "However, I have found that human behavior is rarely driven by sudden bursts of misplaced sentimentality. It is almost always driven by external catalysts." He tapped the screen twice and held the phone up so the bright display faced Harper. My sister's eyes darted toward the device, and the false maternal bravado vanished from her face instantly. "Tell me," Harper Marcus continued, his voice dropping an octave, "did your sudden desire to reconnect with Leo hit you before or after Julian Hayes broke his neck on a black diamond run in the French Alps?" The name sucked the remaining oxygen out of the bridal suite. Julian Hayes. I had not heard that name spoken aloud in 5 years. Julian was the heir to a lucrative commercial real estate fortune. He was also the man who had funded Harper's lifestyle during her early 20s. When Harper announced her pregnancy, Julian's wealthy family swiftly intervened. They offered a substantial, undocumented cash settlement in exchange for a clean break. They wanted zero legal ties to the child, and Harper, eager to maintain her freedom and avoid a messy paternity battle, accepted the arrangement. Julian walked away, and Harper eventually followed suit, leaving me to pick up the pieces. Beverly let out a sharp gasp, her hand flying to her chest. Trent, the probate lawyer, froze his thumb, hovering uselessly over his phone screen. Marcus lowered his device, but he did not break eye contact with Harper. It is remarkable how quickly information travels in the digital age. I set up a Google alert for Julian's name years ago, purely as a precaution for Leo's future medical history. Yesterday afternoon, the alert triggered. The Hayes family released a quiet, private obituary. Julian was killed in a skiing accident 6 days ago. I watched the color drain completely from Harper's face. Her carefully constructed facade of a recovering mother crumbled, revealing the raw, frantic panic underneath. She looked wildly at Trent, silently begging the lawyer to intervene, but Trent remained rigid, assessing the shift in the room's dynamic. "A fatal accident in Europe," Marcus deduced aloud, pacing slowly. "It takes a few days to transport the remains back to the States. It takes another day or two for the family lawyers to begin executing the estate. Julian was young. He lived fast. It is highly unlikely he drafted an updated comprehensive will. And according to state intestacy laws, when an unmarried individual dies without a will, their assets pass directly to their closest living heir." Marcus turned his head, looking toward the heavy velvet drapes where my terrified 5-year-old nephew stood hiding. "Their closest living biological heir," Marcus emphasized. The pieces slammed together with blinding clarity. The urgency, the involvement of an elite probate attorney, the willingness to commit federal perjury to secure an emergency custody mandate. It was never about a mother wanting her son. It was about a sudden, unexpected windfall. Julian Hayes was dead. Leo, as his only biological child, was the sole heir to a vast real estate fortune. But Leo was 5 years old. He could not access bank accounts or manage property portfolios. The state would require a legal guardian to control the inheritance until the boy reached adulthood. Whoever held physical and legal custody of Leo would effectively control the entire Hayes fortune. "You do not want a son," I said, stepping forward until I was inches away from Harper. My voice trembled not with fear but with a deep volcanic rage. "You want a paycheck. You realize Julian died intestate. You realize Leo is about to inherit millions. And you knew that if you did not establish immediate physical custody before the probate court appointed a fiduciary, you would never see a dime of that money." Harper backed away, her heels clicking against the hardwood floor. "You do not know what you are talking about. You are making up conspiracy theories to keep my child away from me. Stop lying!" I yelled, the sound echoing off the walls. I pointed at the lawyer. You hired a probate attorney to ambush a wedding because you are terrified the Hayes family lawyers will lock down the estate before you can get your hands on the cash. You needed to present yourself as the active primary caregiver to secure control of the trust. I whipped around to face Beverly. My mother stood pinned against the vanity, her eyes wide with caught guilt. "And you," I seethed. "You sat in a courtroom and swore under oath that I abused a child. You risked my career and my freedom. You were willing to let Marcus and me go to prison so your favorite daughter could steal a dead man's money." Beverly stammered, raising her hands defensively. "Chloe, try to understand. The Hayes family has $12 million in liquid assets alone. $12 million. That money belongs in this family. Harper is the biological mother. It is her right to manage her son's future. You have done a fine job babysitting, but you are not equipped to handle that level of wealth. We were going to compensate you for your time. Compensate me." She viewed my 5 years of sleepless nights, hospital visits, and unconditional love as a shift job she could pay off with a severance check. She viewed her own grandson as a winning lottery ticket. Trent realized his carefully orchestrated ambush was unraveling. The narrative of the distressed mother was destroyed. He needed to pivot back to his only weapon. The legal document. The motivations are legally irrelevant. Trent interrupted, his voice sharp and loud. He stepped forward, putting himself between me and Harper. "The state of Julian Hayes's finances has no bearing on the document in my hand. Family court does not care about your theories regarding an inheritance. They care about the signed mandate. The judge issued an order for immediate physical custody based on a sworn affidavit of abuse. That order remains active until it is challenged in a formal hearing, which you cannot do today." He held up his phone. "You have exhausted my patience. Hand the child over to his mother, or I dispatch the police to arrest you for custodial interference." Trent was right about one thing. A patrol officer responding to a custody dispute would not care about probate law or a dead billionaire in the Alps. They would look at the red county stamp, they would look at the sworn affidavit, and they would enforce the order. They would take Leo. But Trent was wrong about everything else. He assumed I was fighting a defensive battle. He assumed his paperwork was the ultimate authority in the room. He did not realize that I had anticipated a day like this from the moment I first held Leo in the neonatal intensive care unit 5 years ago. I did not just raise that boy. I legally fortified my right to protect him. And the document resting in the safe behind Trent was about to render his emergency mandate entirely worthless. Trent adjusted his grip on the leather briefcase, his face hardening into an unyielding mask of corporate aggression. He stepped past Marcus, placing himself firmly in the center of the bridal suite. He recognized the shift in power and acted swiftly to reclaim control. "The motivations of my client are entirely immaterial to the situation at hand," Trent stated. His voice carried the sharp, authoritative cadence of a man accustomed to commanding courtrooms. "You can speculate about inheritances and probate law all you desire, Miss Evans. It does not change the reality of this room. The document resting on that vanity is an active, enforceable mandate signed by a sitting judge in family court. It is black ink on white paper. The law requires immediate compliance. You do not have the luxury of delaying this transfer." He raised his hand, pointing a rigid finger towards the heavy velvet drapes where Leo remained hidden. "Hand over the minor child. I will not ask again." I ignored the lawyer. My attention locked onto the woman standing near the vanity mirror. Beverly Evans, the mother who had raised me, the woman who had helped me pick out the white lace gown I currently wore, watched the scene unfold with a chilling detachment. She had orchestrated this ambush. She had signed the perjured affidavit. She had knowingly weaponized the justice system to rip a child from a safe home. I took a slow, deliberate step toward her. The rustle of my silk dress sounded exceptionally loud in the tense silence. "You knew," I said, keeping my voice low and dangerously steady. "You knew Julian was dead. You knew Leo was about to inherit the Hayes estate." Beverly pressed her lips into a thin, pale line. She refused to break eye contact, but her silence served as a profound confession. "I work in wealth management." I continued, ensuring every syllable landed with maximum impact. "I understand exactly how intestate succession functions. Julian died without a will. According to state law, his biological son is the sole legal heir to a portfolio valued at roughly $12 million. but a 5-year-old cannot manage commercial real estate or liquid capital. The state requires a fiduciary. The court appoints a guardian to oversee the assets until the child reaches the age of majority. I stepped closer, invading her personal space. The scent of her expensive perfume turned my stomach, and whoever holds physical custody of the child stands first in line to be appointed as that financial guardian. They gain direct access to the funds. They control the disbursements. They manage the trust. I turned my head slightly, glaring at Harper. My sister stood near the door, her arms crossed tightly, attempting to maintain a facade of maternal indignation. But the panic flickering in her eyes betrayed her true objective. Harper's sudden, overwhelming desire to be a mother is nothing more than a strategic financial maneuver, I declared. Her fierce maternal instinct carries a $12 million price tag. You did not come here to reclaim a son. You came here to secure a bank account. Harper uncrossed her arms, stepping forward with renewed defensive energy. You are twisting the narrative, Chloe. You always do this. You try to make me look like a monster so you can play the saint. I am his mother. I carried him. I gave birth to him. I have a right to secure his future. Secure his future. I laughed, a harsh, bitter sound that held zero humor. You want to secure your own future. You blew through your credit limits years ago. You do not have a steady income. You realize that if you did not establish physical custody before the Hayes family lawyers locked down the probate proceedings, you would never see a single cent of Julian's money. You needed to present yourself to the probate court as the active primary caregiver. I whipped back around to face Beverly, and you helped her do it. You sat in a legal office and drafted a sworn affidavit accusing me of violent child abuse. You told a judge that Marcus and I beat a 5-year-old boy. You deliberately shattered my wedding day, risked my professional license, and endangered my freedom, all to help your favorite daughter steal a dead man's fortune. Beverly lifted her chin, refusing to show remorse. The moral decay emanating from her posture was staggering. She viewed this situation as a simple business transaction, an opportunity too lucrative to pass up. You need to look at the larger picture, Chloe Beverly said, her tone dripping with condescending pragmatism. $12 million belongs in this family. The Hayes estate will try to keep the money locked in restrictive trusts if we do not act swiftly. Harper is the biological mother. It is her inherent right to manage those assets. You have done an adequate job watching the boy, but you lack the blood connection to fight the Hayes lawyers in probate court. We are protecting the child's inheritance. Protecting his inheritance. Marcus spoke up, his deep voice slicing through Beverly's rationalization. You are attempting to hijack a trust fund to pay off debts and fund a lifestyle. Do not pretend this is about the child's welfare. You perjured yourself. You committed a federal crime to secure a document you plan to use as a financial weapon. Trent realized the conversation was slipping entirely out of his control. The tactical advantage of surprise had evaporated. The bride and groom were not panicking. They were dissecting the legal strategy with terrifying precision. He needed to execute the extraction immediately. Enough, Trent barked, abandoning the last remnants of professional courtesy. He reached into his suit pocket and retrieved his smartphone. I am done debating probate theory. The emergency order is active. You are in violation of a judicial mandate. I am calling dispatch. He unlocked his screen, holding the device up so we could see the keypad. I warned you, Miss Evans. You leave me no choice. He pressed the first digit. Before his finger could hit the second number, a sound pierced the heavy atmosphere of the bridal suite. It was not a ringtone or a notification. It was a loud, rhythmic wail echoing from outside the building. The sound grew louder, multiplying in intensity. The distinct alternating pitch of emergency sirens tore through the quiet afternoon air, approaching the venue at high speed. The wailing noises bounced off the chapel walls, cutting through the music playing for the seated guests in the main hall. Trent stopped typing. He lowered his phone, a confused frown creasing his forehead. He had not dialed the police. Harper rushed to the bay window, pushing aside the velvet drapes. She looked out toward the main entrance of the venue. The color rapidly drained from her face for the second time that day. "They are here," Harper whispered, her voice trembling. "The police are already here." I looked at Marcus. My fiancé did not look surprised. He stood tall, his hands resting comfortably at his sides. He had not touched his phone since revealing Julian's death. He had not signaled anyone. Beverly turned to me, her eyes wide with sudden, frantic realization. "Did you call them?" she demanded, her voice shrill with rising panic. "Did you dial 911 while we were arguing?" I shook my head, keeping my expression entirely neutral. "I did not call the police, Beverly. I did not have to." The siren stopped abruptly, replaced by the crunch of heavy tires on the gravel driveway outside. The flashing red and blue lights illuminated the frosted glass of the bridal suite window, casting frantic shadows across the walls. Heavy footsteps echoed down the main corridor, moving swiftly toward our location. Someone had anticipated the conflict. Someone had arranged for an armed presence before Trent even threatened to make the call. The tension in the room escalated from a heated family dispute to an imminent law enforcement intervention. The conflict was no longer contained within four walls. The authorities had arrived, and they were walking straight toward the bridal suite doors. The heavy brass handle of the bridal suite door turned with a sharp click. The wood swung inward, revealing two uniformed police officers stepping into the room. Their hands rested instinctively near their duty belts. Their eyes swept the space, immediately assessing the threat level within the confined area. I looked at Trent. The attorney appeared just as caught off guard as I felt. He had not dialed dispatch. My gaze shifted to my mother. Beverly wiped an invisible tear from her cheek and took a trembling, calculated step toward the officers. She had orchestrated this. Before she even walked down the chapel aisle to disrupt my ceremony, she had placed the call. Growing up, my mother never entered a confrontation without stacking the deck in her favor. Whether she was disputing property lines with a neighbor or contesting Harper's failing grades with the local school board, Beverly always ensured she had an authority figure in her pocket before the argument began. She viewed law enforcement the same way she viewed the service industry. They were simply tools to enforce her convenience. "Officers, thank goodness you arrived," Beverly cried. Her voice quivered with manufactured terror, a stark contrast to the cold arrogance she displayed just moments prior. "My eldest daughter is holding my grandson hostage. We possess a court order, and she refuses to let him go." The lead officer, a tall man with a severe buzz cut and a rigid jawline, held up a gloved hand to pause her performance. "We received a dispatch regarding the unlawful detention of a minor, who holds the legal mandate." Trent recovered his professional composure. He stepped forward, handing the thick stack of papers to the officer. Trent Sterling, representing the biological mother, Harper Evans. "We secured an emergency ex parte custody order this morning. The individual in the wedding dress is defying a judicial directive." The officer accepted the document. He reviewed the first page, his eyes scanning the dense legal text. He examined the bright red county clerk stamp. He scrutinized the signature of the family court judge. This is the brutal, unyielding reality of the American legal system. Patrol officers responding to domestic disputes do not act as judges. They do not cross-examine witnesses on the scene or evaluate the moral standing of the conflicting parties. Their sole responsibility is to enforce active, verified court documents. And on paper, Trent held the winning hand. The officer handed the document back to the attorney and turned to face me. "Ma'am, is this minor child currently in your possession?" Marcus remained standing tall, his broad shoulders shielding Leo from view. In his role as a corporate cybersecurity executive, Marcus routinely briefed federal agents on complex data breaches. He knew how to speak to law enforcement with measured analytical authority. But he also understood the precarious dynamic of his physical presence in this specific scenario. Any sudden movement, any perceived aggression from a black man in a high-tension standoff with police could provoke a disastrous escalation. He kept his hands visible, his posture relaxed, and his voice low. "Officer, the affidavit securing that mandate is entirely fraudulent," Marcus stated. Meeting the policeman's gaze, "We possess evidence proving perjury. The grandmother submitted false testimony to expedite the ruling." The officer shook his head, his tone leaving zero room for debate. "Sir, that is a matter for the family court to sort out on Monday morning. Right now, I possess a mandate signed by a county judge ordering the immediate transfer of physical custody to Harper Evans. I have a duty to execute this order." The second officer stepped further into the room, flanking his partner. The atmosphere in the bridal suite grew suffocating. The scent of expensive roses and spilled champagne mingled with the sterile metallic presence of the tactical gear. The lead officer took a deliberate step toward me. "Miss, I am instructing you to hand the boy over to his mother. If you refuse to comply with a lawful order, I will be forced to place you under arrest for custodial interference. Do not make me put handcuffs on a bride." The threat hung heavy in the air. He was giving me an ultimatum. Surrender the boy I raised to a woman seeking a payday, or walk out of my own wedding in police custody. Harper sensed the shift in power. The presence of the badge emboldened her. She dropped the facade of the traumatized recovering mother and let a cruel, triumphant smirk spread across her features. She walked right past the officers, closing the distance between us. "You heard the man," Chloe Harper said, her voice dripping with venomous satisfaction. "The game is over. Give me my son." She reached around Marcus, her manicured fingers grasping roughly at Leo's small shoulder. She pulled, attempting to physically drag the child away from his designated safe space. Leo let out a piercing, terrified scream. The sound tore through the room, shattering whatever composure I had left. He recoiled from her touch, burying his face deeper into Marcus's leg. His tiny fingers clutched the fabric of the tuxedo trousers with desperate, frantic strength. He did not cry for his mother. He cried for the only parents he had ever known. "Stop touching him," Marcus ordered, his voice vibrating with a protective intensity that made Harper take a quick step backward. The lead officer rested his hand on his utility belt. "Sir, step aside and release the child, or you will face felony obstruction charges. We are taking the boy today." The walls of the room felt like they were closing in, crushing my lungs. The combined weight of the judicial system, armed law enforcement, and the staggering deceit of my own flesh and blood pushed me to the very edge of the precipice. My mother stood in the corner, feigning distress, while successfully weaponizing the police against her own daughter. Trent stood by the vanity, holding the fraudulent paperwork like an impenetrable shield. Harper waited with a greedy gleam in her eye, ready to claim her $12 million prize. The officers stood ready to strip me of my freedom and my future. They had backed me into the ultimate corner. They relied on the assumption that a law-abiding wealth manager would fold under the threat of incarceration. They calculated that the fear of a ruined reputation and a public perp walk would force my compliance. They thought they had secured a checkmate, but they forgot how I earn my living. I do not just read contracts. I draft legal barriers designed to withstand hostile takeovers. I secure assets against predatory claims. I knew this day might arrive from the very first night Harper dropped a screaming infant on my porch and disappeared into the city. I had spent years anticipating this exact vulnerability, and I had prepared a countermeasure they never saw coming. It was time to shift the battlefield. The heavy silence in the bridal suite amplified the sound of Leo's muffled crying. The officers stood firm, their postures rigid and unyielding. They possessed a mandate carrying the weight of a county judge, and they were prepared to execute it. My mother watched me with a look of calculating satisfaction, assuming my silence was the prelude to my surrender. Harper stared at the child, her eyes reflecting the avarice of a woman envisioning a $12 million deposit. I did not scream. I did not drop to my knees and plead for mercy. I drew a slow, deliberate breath, centering my focus, locking away the panic attempting to seize my chest. I turned my attention away from the hostile family members and addressed the lead officer directly. "Sir, the document Mr. Sterling presented is indeed bearing a legitimate county seal," I stated. My tone was unnervingly level, devoid of any emotional tremor. It carried the professional detachment I utilized when explaining complex tax liabilities to aggressive clients. However, that mandate was issued under fundamentally false pretenses. The judge signed that order based on a critical, undisclosed misrepresentation of identity. The officer frowned, his hand remaining near his duty belt. "Miss, I am not a judge. I do not conduct evidentiary hearings. I enforce active mandates. You are out of time." I held up a single finger, requesting a brief pause. I turned away from the officers and walked toward the small, heavy security safe bolted into the cabinetry of the bridal suite vanity. Marcus and I had requested the venue provide the secure storage to hold our wedding rings and sensitive travel documents prior to the ceremony. I quickly punched in the 6-digit access code. The electronic lock beeped, and the heavy metal door swung open. To secure an ex parte emergency custody order, the petitioner must possess legal standing, I explained, keeping my voice steady as I reached into the dark interior of the safe. The individual petitioning the court must hold legally recognized parental or guardianship rights over the minor in question. I withdrew a thick manila envelope from the safe. It was heavy, sealed with a distinct red wax emblem from a family law practice in downtown Chicago. I turned back to face the room. Harper Evans claimed that standing. She presented herself to the court as the biological legal mother of the child. I continued my gaze shifting to lock onto my sister's pale face, but she omitted a crucial piece of information when she filed that petition this morning. I approached the marble vanity bypassing Trent and his fraudulent paperwork. I broke the red wax seal on the envelope and pulled out a stack of pristine legal-sized documents. I placed the documents firmly on the marble surface and slid them directly toward the lead police officer. I tapped the bold, capitalized text centered at the top of the primary page, "Final Decree of Adoption." The officer stepped forward, his brow furrowing as he looked down at the paperwork. The room fell into a stunned, breathless void. Trent, the probate attorney, stiffened his eyes, darting toward the documents on the table. 3 years ago, I initiated formal adoption proceedings in Cook County. I stated my voice echoing with absolute, unshakable authority. I submitted the necessary petitions. I completed the required home studies and background checks. I stood before a family court judge and finalizing the process. I am the sole legally recognized parent of Leo Evans. I looked at Harper, watching the false bravado shatter into a million irreparable pieces. Harper Evans holds zero legal standing in the life of this child. She possesses no parental rights. She possesses no visitation rights. Under the eyes of the law, she is nothing more than a biological donor who severed all ties 36 months ago. Beverly let out a sharp, choked gasp, her hand flying to cover her mouth. She stared at the decree of adoption as if it were a venomous snake coiled on the vanity. She had no idea. During the entirety of the adoption process, I maintained strict operational security. I knew my mother would attempt to sabotage the proceedings to protect Harper's hypothetical future options. I hired a private attorney, sealed the records, and finalized the decree without whispering a single word to my family. The lead officer picked up the document. He scanned the official court stamps, the judge's signature, and the clear, unambiguous language terminating the biological mother's rights and establishing Chloe Evans as the sole adoptive parent. He compared the date on the adoption decree to the date on the emergency custody order Trent had provided. The adoption decree predated the custody order by 3 years. He looked up, turning a hard, assessing glare toward Trent. "Counselor," the officer said, his tone shifting from authoritative enforcement to dangerous suspicion. "You submitted an ex parte petition for custody on behalf of a client who possesses no legal parental rights." Trent's face drained of color. The slick, arrogant facade of the elite probate lawyer dissolved instantly. He stared at the adoption decree, his eyes wide with a mixture of shock and rapidly mounting terror. He was not looking at a lost case. He was looking at the abrupt, catastrophic end of his legal career. In the American legal system, an attorney holds an absolute duty of candor to the tribunal. Filing an emergency petition for custody while actively concealing the fact that the client previously surrendered all parental rights constitutes a massive, egregious fraud upon the court. It is a violation that results in severe sanctions, massive fines, and potential disbarment. Trent turned slowly to face Harper. The professional detachment vanished, replaced by an expression of pure, unadulterated fury. "You told me you left the child in your sister's care temporarily." Trent hissed, his voice tight with barely contained rage. "You told me you never signed any formal custody agreements. You told me you retained full legal rights." Harper backed away, her hands trembling as she bumped into the heavy wooden door of the bridal suite. I did not think it mattered," she stammered, her voice high and frantic. "I gave birth to him. I am his real mother. A piece of paper does not change biology. I just let her adopt him so I would not have to deal with the medical bills and the insurance paperwork." The admission hung in the air, a toxic cloud of profound moral bankruptcy. She had not just abandoned her son. She had actively, legally discarded him simply because the administrative burden of his health care inconvenienced her lifestyle. Now she was attempting to use a high-priced lawyer and a forged narrative to steal him back simply because his biological father died, leaving an 8-figure fortune. The dynamic in the room inverted entirely. The emergency custody order Trent held was null and void. The police officers who just minutes prior were threatening to arrest me now viewed my sister and her attorney as the perpetrators of a complex legal fraud. The trap my family had so carefully constructed had snapped shut, but they were the ones caught inside the steel jaws. However, the revelation of the adoption decree was only the first layer of my defense. They had brought a knife to a gunfight, and I had not yet revealed the true cost of Harper's betrayal. Trent snatched the final decree of adoption from the marble vanity. His eyes scanned the dense legal text darting across the judge's signature and the explicit clauses terminating Harper's parental rights. The color drained from his face, leaving his complexion the shade of old parchment. He was an elite probate attorney, accustomed to navigating complex asset distributions, not a junior associate prone to amateur oversights. The realization that he had built a high-stakes litigation strategy on a foundation of absolute deceit shattered his professional composure. He whipped around, closing the distance between himself and Harper in 2 long strides. He thrust the document toward her face. "You explicitly stated this was a temporary guardianship arrangement." Trent hissed, his voice vibrating with barely restrained fury. "You sat in my office yesterday and swore you had never formalized any relinquishment of your maternal status. You assured me you retained full legal rights to the child. Did you sign a voluntary termination of parental rights?" Harper recoiled her back, pressing hard against the solid oak door of the bridal suite. Her eyes darted wildly around the room, searching for an escape route that did not exist. She looked at Beverly, then at Marcus, and finally at the 2 police officers watching the scene with hardening expressions. I did not know it was permanent." Harper stammered, her voice thin and reedy. She clutched her silk slip dress, a gesture of faux vulnerability that fooled absolutely no one. "Chloe gave me a stack of papers to sign when I was going through a very difficult transitional period. I thought they were just medical consent forms so she could take Leo to his asthma appointments. I did not understand the legal implications. I am the victim here. She manipulated a vulnerable mother. The audacity was staggering but predictable. Harper had spent her entire existence deflecting accountability. Whenever her reckless choices yielded consequences, she constructed a narrative where she was the injured party relying on Beverly to enforce the delusion. But this was not a dispute over a maxed-out credit card or a wrecked vehicle. This was a court of law, and ignorance was not a viable defense. I let out a short, hollow laugh that held zero warmth. It cut through the tension in the room like a physical blade. I stepped away from the vanity and moved toward my sister. "Do not insult my intelligence, and do not waste the officer's time with this pathetic performance," I stated, my voice echoing with icy precision. "You did not sign a stack of confusing medical forms, Harper. You signed a comprehensive, legally binding relinquishment of your parental rights in the presence of an independent notary public and a family law attorney." I reached back into the manila envelope I had pulled from the safe. I withdrew a secondary packet of documents bound by a heavy black clip. I held the packet up, ensuring the bold text on the first page was visible to everyone in the room, especially the lawyer. "You read every single line of that agreement before you signed it." I continued, my gaze fixed on Harper. "Because you were highly motivated by the financial compensation attached to the relinquishment." Beverly stepped forward, her face contorting with a mixture of confusion and sudden dread. "Financial compensation. Chloe, what are you talking about?" I turned my attention to my mother, allowing the full weight of her daughter's depravity to settle over her. 3 years ago, Harper's illusion of a glamorous influencer lifestyle collided with financial reality, I explained, keeping my tone clinical and detached. Her sponsored posts dried up. She maxed out 4 separate premium credit cards, attempting to maintain the facade of luxury travel. The creditors initiated aggressively hostile collection tactics. They threatened to garnish the meager wages she earned from intermittent modeling gigs and seize her assets. She was drowning in over $45,000 of unsecured debt. I looked back at Harper, watching her desperately attempt to maintain eye contact before her gaze dropped to the floor. "She arrived at my apartment unannounced on a Tuesday evening," I stated, projecting my voice so every detail reached the officers standing near the door. "She did not ask about Leo's health. She did not ask how he was adjusting to preschool. She asked for a loan. When I refused to enable her irresponsibility, she offered a transaction." The bridal suite fell into a profound, suffocating silence. The implications of my words hovered in the air, a toxic revelation that stripped away the final remnants of Harper's maternal defense. I placed the secondary packet of documents on the vanity next to the adoption decree. "This is a comprehensive settlement agreement," I announced, tapping the top page. "It contains a strict non-disclosure clause. 3 years ago, Harper Evans voluntarily and with full legal counsel agreed to permanently terminate her parental rights. In exchange, I executed a wire transfer of $50,000 directly to her primary checking account. I paid off her debts and funded her next trip to Mykonos." I paused, allowing the raw, brutal truth to echo in the confined space. She did not leave the child with me because she needed time to heal. She sold her rights to her own son for $50,000. Trent stared at the settlement agreement on the vanity. The color that had briefly returned to his face vanished entirely. He was a ruthless probate attorney, a shark accustomed to navigating the murky waters of contested estates and bitter inheritances. But he operated within the boundaries of the law. He recognized the catastrophic legal peril his client had just dragged him into. A biological mother who actively sold her parental rights 3 years prior was currently to use his law firm to secure physical custody of the child solely because the biological father had just died, leaving a $12 million estate. It was not just a custody dispute. It was a sophisticated, high-stakes financial fraud, and Trent was listed as the attorney of record on the fraudulent filings. Beverly let out a low, strangled noise. She looked at Harper, her expression shifting from fierce defense to horrified realization. "Harper, did you actually take money for the boy?" Harper pressed her back against the door, her breathing shallow and rapid. "Mom, I had to. The credit card companies were going to sue me. I was going to lose everything. Chloe had the money. She was already raising him. It was a mutually beneficial arrangement. I just needed a fresh start. You sold him." Beverly whispered, the magnitude of the betrayal finally penetrating her deeply ingrained denial. Beverly's shock was genuine, but it did not absolve her. She had perjured herself. She had signed a sworn affidavit claiming Marcus and I abused Leo, all to help Harper secure the emergency mandate. She had been willing to destroy my life without knowing the full extent of Harper's deceit, but she had still pulled the trigger. Trent stepped away from the vanity. He distanced himself from Harper, physically separating his professional standing from her toxic presence. He turned to face the 2 police officers. "Officers," Trent began, his voice tight-stripped of its former arrogance, "I formally state for the record that my firm Sterling & Associates was entirely unaware of the existence of the adoption decree or the financial settlement attached to the relinquishment of parental rights. My client deliberately withheld this material information during our consultation. The emergency custody petition was filed based on fraudulent representations provided by Harper Evans and Beverly Evans." The lead officer narrowed his eyes, his hand resting firmly on his duty belt. "Are you stating that the emergency mandate you presented to us is invalid, Counselor?" "It is entirely invalid." Trent confirmed, his tone carrying the desperate urgency of self-preservation. "I am formally withdrawing the mandate. I am withdrawing as counsel for Miss Evans, effective immediately." He looked at Harper with an expression of pure, concentrated venom. "You lied to my firm. You utilized our resources to perpetrate a fraud upon the court. You will be receiving a communication from our litigation department regarding the damages you have caused." Trent reached for the door handle, eager to escape the imploding situation. But before he could turn the brass knob, my voice cut through the tension, halting his retreat. "You are not leaving yet, Mr. Sterling," I commanded. The tone of my voice brooked no argument. Trent paused, his hand gripping the handle. He turned his head, his expression defensive. "I have withdrawn the mandate, Miss Evans. The immediate threat to your custody has been neutralized. My involvement in this matter is concluded." I shook my head, my eyes locked on the disgraced attorney. "Your involvement is far from concluded. Withdrawing the mandate stops the immediate extraction, but it does not erase the actions taken to secure it." I stepped forward, pulling a slender digital recording device from the pocket hidden within the folds of my wedding gown. I held the device up, my thumb resting over the play button. Harper and Beverly had constructed their attack on deceit, but I had engineered my defense on undeniable documented proof. And the lawyer who facilitated their assault was about to discover the true depth of the trap he had walked into. Trent paused, his hand gripping the heavy brass handle of the bridal suite door. The confidence that defined his earlier entrance had vanished, replaced by the distinct rigid posture of a man assessing a sudden, unexpected threat. He turned slowly, his gaze dropping to the small digital recording device resting in my palm. The red light glowed, a silent testament to the meticulously documented conversation. "My involvement in this matter is concluded," Trent repeated, though his voice lacked conviction. He attempted to project professional detachment, but the slight tremor in his jaw betrayed his anxiety. "I have withdrawn the mandate. The immediate issue of custody is resolved." I lowered the recording device, keeping my thumb firmly planted over the controls. I did not raise my voice. I did not need to. The quiet authority I utilized in high-stakes financial negotiations filled the room, commanding absolute attention. "The immediate issue of physical custody is resolved." I corrected my tone, clinical and precise. "However, the legal and professional ramifications of your actions this morning are just beginning. You do not get to walk away simply because your ambush failed." I stepped toward the marble vanity, closing the distance between myself and the attorney. I picked up the fraudulent emergency custody mandate Trent had tossed onto the surface minutes earlier. I held the document up, ensuring the bright red county stamp was visible to everyone in the room. "Mr. Sterling, you are a licensed attorney in the state of Illinois," I stated, my gaze locking onto his pale face. "You operate an elite probate firm. You are intimately familiar with the rules of professional conduct. You understand the profound legal weight of the documents you submit to a sitting judge." Trent swallowed hard, the movement visible against the stiff collar of his dress shirt. "I relied on the information provided by my client. An attorney advocates based on the facts presented during consultation. You relied on a narrative that fit your financial objectives," I countered, slicing through his defense. "You did not conduct a basic background check on a client seeking an ex parte emergency order. You did not verify her standing. You bypassed standard due diligence because you were racing against the clock to secure control of the Hayes estate before the probate court appointed an independent fiduciary." I dropped the fraudulent mandate back onto the marble surface. It landed with a soft thud, a stark contrast to the heavy silence permeating the bridal suite. Filing an emergency petition for custody while actively concealing the fact that your client legally relinquished all parental rights 3 years prior is not a clerical error. I continued enunciating every syllable with deliberate clarity. "It is a direct, calculated violation of your duty of candor to the tribunal." Trent shifted his weight, glancing nervously toward the 2 police officers standing near the door. The officers remained silent, their expressions hardening as they observed the unfolding legal confrontation. They recognized the gravity of the accusations being leveled. "When you submitted this petition, you presented Harper Evans as the legal biological mother of the minor child," I said, pointing a manicured nail at the document. "You knew, or you should have known through basic legal discovery, that she possessed zero standing. By presenting this fabricated narrative to a family court judge, you and your client engaged in fraud upon the court." The legal term hung in the air, a devastating indictment that stripped away the last remnants of Trent's professional shield. Fraud upon the court was not a simple malpractice claim. It was an egregious offense that struck at the core integrity of the judicial system. It was the kind of violation that ended careers and triggered aggressive investigations by the State Bar Association. "And you compounded that fraud by utilizing a perjured affidavit," I added, shifting my gaze briefly to my mother. "You submitted a sworn statement from Beverly Evans, a witness who knowingly provided false testimony regarding physical abuse to secure the emergency mandate. You utilized perjury to manipulate a judge into granting an order you intended to use as a financial weapon." Trent raised his hands in a defensive gesture, his composure cracking under the weight of the allegations. "I had no knowledge the affidavit was fraudulent. Beverly Evans swore under oath that the contents were true. I am not responsible for the perjury of a witness. You are responsible for the documents you file under your firm's letterhead," I shot back, rejecting his attempt to deflect blame. "You leveraged a fabricated narrative of violent child abuse to bypass standard legal procedures. You weaponized the family court system to facilitate an attempted theft of a $12 million inheritance." I reached into the small pocket hidden within the seams of my wedding gown. I retrieved a sleek, embossed business card and tossed it onto the marble vanity. The card landed next to the fraudulent mandate and the final decree of adoption. Chloe Evans, Senior Wealth Management Advisor. The stark black text on the heavy cardstock gleamed under the vanity lights. Trent stared at the business card, the reality of his opponent finally crystallizing in his mind. He had not attempted to intimidate a panicking bride. He had attempted to defraud a financial professional whose entire career was built on protecting assets and navigating complex legal structures. "I am not just the adoptive mother of Leo Evans," I stated, my voice echoing with unyielding resolve. "Last week, following the confirmation of Julian Hayes's death, the patriarch of the Hayes family contacted my firm. Recognizing my established legal relationship with his grandson Julian's father, formally requested that I act as the primary financial fiduciary for Leo's inheritance." The revelation struck Trent like a physical blow. The Hayes family, possessing immense wealth and formidable legal resources, had already secured the perimeter around the estate. They had bypassed standard probate delays by directly appointing a trusted, verified professional to manage the assets. The entire premise of Trent's aggressive ambush was fundamentally flawed from the beginning. As the legally designated fiduciary for the Hayes Trust, I possess a fiduciary duty to protect those assets from predatory claims. I continued, my eyes locked on the disgraced attorney. And as a licensed wealth manager, I am mandated to report sophisticated financial fraud. I leaned forward, resting my hands on the edge of the marble vanity. I did not raise my voice, but the threat I delivered was absolute and devastating. "First thing Monday morning, I will transmit a comprehensive file to the State Bar Association detailing your involvement in this fraud upon the court. I will provide the adoption decree, the financial settlement agreement, and the audio recording of this interaction. I will ensure they understand that Sterling and Associates utilized a perjured affidavit to attempt a hostile takeover of a $12 million estate." Trent's shoulders slumped. The arrogant posture he carried into the venue was entirely gone, replaced by the grim realization of a man staring down the barrel of professional ruin. Disbarment was no longer a hypothetical risk. It was an imminent, unavoidable certainty. Furthermore, I added, delivering the final, crushing blow. "I will forward this same file to the Hayes family legal team. They possess significantly more resources than I do, and they take a very dim view of individuals attempting to steal from their grandson. They will bury you in civil litigation before the Bar Association even finishes processing my complaint." Trent looked at the documents on the vanity, then at the recording device in my hand. The calculation playing out in his mind was evident. He was searching for an exit strategy, a way to mitigate the catastrophic damage he had inflicted upon himself. But the trap was flawless. He had left his fingerprints on every fraudulent document submitted to the court. "I strongly advise you to contact your malpractice carrier, Mr. Sterling." I suggested, my tone devoid of any sympathy. "You are going to need a very good lawyer." The attorney did not offer a rebuttal. He did not attempt to defend his actions or justify his strategy. The undeniable weight of the evidence crushed any potential argument. Trent turned away from the vanity, his gaze dropping to the floor. He walked past Harper without acknowledging her presence, pushed past the two police officers, and exited the bridal suite. The heavy oak door clicked shut behind him, sealing his fate. The alliance that had stormed my wedding was broken. The legal muscle had fled, leaving my sister and my mother entirely exposed. The structural integrity of their assault had collapsed, but the emotional reckoning was just beginning. I turned my attention to the woman who had sworn under oath that I was a monster, ready to dismantle the final layer of their toxic deception. The heavy oak door of the bridal suite clicked shut behind the disgraced attorney, sealing the room in a thick, oppressive silence. Trent's rapid departure effectively removed the legal shield protecting Harper and Beverly. The tactical advantage of their surprise attack had dissolved entirely. They stood exposed, stripped of their professional representation, and trapped within the confines of the room alongside the law enforcement officers they had summoned. Beverly watched the door close, her eyes wide with a frantic, desperate energy. She recognized the catastrophic shift in power. The narrative she had carefully constructed, the role of the valiant grandmother stepping in to save her abused grandson, was crumbling rapidly. She needed a scapegoat to deflect the mounting legal consequences of her perjured affidavit. She needed to distance herself from the fraudulent filings. She turned her gaze toward me, her hands raised in a placating gesture. The arrogant, condescending tone she had wielded earlier vanished, replaced by a shrill, trembling pitch. "Chloe, You must understand my position." Beverly pleaded, her voice cracking under the strain of her manufactured distress. "I was operating under false pretenses. Harper manipulated the situation. She lied to me. She told me the guardianship was temporary. She explicitly stated she retained full parental rights. I had no knowledge of that settlement agreement or the $50,000 transaction. I swear to you, I believed she was the legal mother attempting to reunite with her son." She took a hesitant step forward, reaching out a trembling hand as if to bridge the chasm she had created. "I am a victim here as well, Chloe. I signed that affidavit because I believed my grandson was in distress. Harper provided me with false information. You cannot blame a grandmother for acting on the information presented to her. I thought I was doing the right thing." The sheer audacity of her defense was staggering. She was attempting to rebrand perjury as a tragic misunderstanding. She expected me to believe that a woman who meticulously managed every aspect of her social standing and aggressively controlled her family dynamic had somehow been an unwitting pawn in a complex legal fraud. Before I could address the glaring inconsistencies in her narrative, a sound cut through her desperate rationalization. It was a low, dry chuckle devoid of any humor. Marcus stepped forward from the heavy velvet drapes where he had been shielding Leo. He gently guided the 5-year-old to sit on a tufted ottoman in the corner of the room, out of the direct line of sight of the escalating confrontation. Marcus straightened his posture, smoothing the lapels of his tuxedo jacket. "That is a compelling defense, Mrs. Evans," Marcus stated, his deep voice resonating with calm, unwavering authority. "Ignorance of the underlying fraud might mitigate the severity of the perjury charges provided. A jury believes you were genuinely manipulated by your daughter." He reached into the inner pocket of his tuxedo and withdrew a sleek, matte black tablet. He tapped the screen, the cool blue light illuminating his focused expression. "However, as a corporate cybersecurity executive, I operate on the principle that digital information is never truly erased." Marcus continued, his eyes remaining fixed on the screen. "People are notoriously careless with their communications. They assume a deleted text message or a private phone call vanishes into the ether. They fail to comprehend that data leaves an indelible footprint, provided you possess the technical acumen to retrieve it." Beverly's hands dropped to her sides. The frantic pleading ceased, replaced by a sudden, rigid stillness. The mention of digital retrieval triggered a visceral reaction. The color that had briefly returned to her face drained away once more. Marcus tapped the tablet screen twice, navigating through a series of encrypted folders. "When we moved into the new house 6 months ago, I implemented a comprehensive enterprise-grade network security protocol." He explained, his tone conversational and detached. "It was a standard precaution, given the sensitive nature of my work. The system includes an automated encrypted backup of all network traffic routing through our primary Wi-Fi access point. It captures metadata connection logs and occasionally unencrypted voice-over IP data packets." He looked up from the tablet, locking eyes with my mother. A cold, predatory intelligence glinted in his gaze. "Last week, when the Google alert triggered for Julian Hayes, I decided to run a diagnostic review of the network logs," Marcus said. "I wanted to ascertain if anyone within our immediate circle was discussing the incident. The system flagged a prolonged voice over IP call originating from your smartphone, Mrs. Evans, while you were visiting our home for Sunday dinner. You were utilizing our guest Wi-Fi network. You stepped out to the patio to take the call. You believed you were having a private conversation with Harper." Beverly recoiled as if she had been physically struck. She stumbled backward, her heel catching on the edge of the plush area rug. She caught her balance, but her composure was irreparably shattered. The carefully constructed facade of the manipulated grandmother disintegrated, exposing the raw, ugly truth beneath. "You recorded my phone calls," Beverly demanded, her voice shrill and panicked. "That is illegal. That is a violation of wiretapping statutes. You cannot use that. I did not actively record a telephone conversation." Marcus clarified, his tone remaining perfectly level. "The security system automatically archived unencrypted data packets transmitting across a network I own and operate. There is a distinct legal difference, and I am highly confident a prosecuting attorney would find the distinction fascinating, especially given the content of the transmission." He tapped the screen one final time. A clear, digitized audio file began playing through the tablet's internal speakers. The sound quality was crisp, capturing the distinct vocal patterns of the two women conversing. The recording began mid-conversation. Harper's voice echoed in the bridal suite, tight with anxiety. "The Hayes family lawyers are going to move fast, Mom. If they lock down the estate in probate, I will never get access to the trust. I need physical custody of Leo before they establish a fiduciary. Trent said we need an emergency order." Beverly's voice replied sharp, pragmatic, and entirely devoid of any maternal concern for the child in question. "Then you get the order, Harper. You do whatever that lawyer tells you to do. We cannot let $12 million slip through our fingers because Chloe is playing house." The recording paused for a brief second, capturing the sound of a sharp intake of breath. Then Beverly's voice continued, delivering the damning, undeniable confirmation of her complicity. "Just remember our arrangement. I will sign whatever affidavit Trent drafts. I will tell the judge Chloe is unfit. But the moment you secure control of that trust fund, you transfer $200,000 to my offshore account. If my bookie does not get his money by the end of the month, I am going to lose the house. You promise me you will clear that gambling debt the second the probate court grants you access to the boy's inheritance." Harper's voice replied instantly, eager and desperate. "I promise, Mom. $200,000 wire transfer. The day the judge signs the fiduciary paperwork. Just get me the affidavit." Marcus paused the audio file. The silence that followed was absolute and devastating. The revelation hung in the air, a toxic, suffocating cloud that stripped away the last remaining shreds of my mother's dignity. The narrative of the protective grandmother was obliterated. The facade of the manipulated victim was destroyed. The audio recording provided irrefutable proof of a cold, calculated financial conspiracy. Beverly had not signed the perjured affidavit to save her grandson from a hostile environment. She had not signed it because she believed Harper was a capable, loving mother. She had committed a federal crime and attempted to destroy her eldest daughter's life solely to secure a $200,000 payout to cover a massive, undisclosed gambling debt. She was willing to sell her grandson's future to an illegal bookmaker to save her own suburban reputation. I stared at the woman who had birthed me. The profound moral decay radiating from her posture was staggering. For 32 years I had navigated the turbulent waters of her favoritism. I had accepted my role as the secondary child, the dependable shock absorber required to cushion Harper's failures. I had endured the subtle criticisms, the missed milestones, and the constant draining financial requests. But this was not favoritism. This was predatory exploitation. She viewed her family not as a unit to be nurtured, but as a portfolio of assets to be leveraged when her hidden vices threatened her comfort. "You lied to a judge," I stated, my voice dropping to a dangerous whisper. "You attempted to frame Marcus and me for child abuse. You conspired to hijack a $12 million inheritance, and you did it all to cover a gambling debt." Beverly did not offer a defense. She did not attempt to deny the contents of the recording. She stood frozen, her eyes darting between Marcus the tablet and the two police officers standing near the door. The officers observed the exchange with hardened expressions. The domestic dispute they had arrived to mediate had rapidly evolved into a complex criminal conspiracy involving perjury fraud and a significant financial motive. The alliance between mother and daughter, built on deceit and fueled by greed, was officially shattered. They had brought a fabricated narrative to a battlefield governed by digital receipts and legal documentation. The trap they set had sprung back on them with devastating force. However, Harper, stripped of her legal counsel and her mother's protective cover, was not ready to surrender. Pushed to the absolute brink, she resorted to the only weapon she had left, attempting a maneuver so reckless it sealed her fate entirely. The damning audio recording echoed into silence, leaving the bridal suite suffocating under the weight of Beverly's exposed greed. The narrative of the protective grandmother was dead. The facade of the recovering mother was obliterated. My mother stood pinned against the vanity, trembling as the reality of her perjury settled in. Trent, the disgraced attorney, had already fled, recognizing the radioactive fallout of the fraudulent mandate. The two police officers remained stationed by the heavy oak door, observing the rapid disintegration of the criminal conspiracy playing out before them. Harper was cornered. Her legal muscle was gone. Her mother's alibi was shattered. The $12 million inheritance she had plotted to hijack was securely locked behind an impenetrable wall of fiduciary oversight. The comprehensive settlement agreement bearing her notarized signature definitively severed any legal claim she held over the child she abandoned. A rational individual would have recognized the overwhelming tactical disadvantage, lowered their head, and accepted defeat. But Harper did not operate on logic or rational assessment. For 27 years, she had navigated life relying on an unearned sense of entitlement and the unwavering protection of our mother's checkbook. When reality failed to align with her desires, she did not adapt. She escalated. Stripped of her legal avenues and her emotional manipulation tactics, Harper descended into pure, unadulterated desperation. She lost the final shred of her manufactured composure. "You think you won?" Harper screamed. Her voice was harsh, jagged, tearing through the quiet room. She lunged forward, her arm extended, pointing a manicured finger directly at my face. The silk of her slip dress clung to her rigid posture. She was shaking her eyes wide with a frantic, cornered energy. "You think you can just pull out a few documents and banish me? You think you can keep $12 million all to yourself while I get nothing? I gave birth to him. Half of that money is rightfully mine." She took another step, invading my personal space. The scent of her expensive perfume failed to mask the sharp odor of her panic. "I will destroy you," Chloe Harper hissed, her voice vibrating with venomous intent. "I will tear your pristine, perfect life apart. You want to play hardball? Fine. We play hardball. I have a platform. I have a voice. I will go to the press. I will call every local news station in Chicago. I will post on TikTok, Instagram, and Twitter. I will go viral." I maintained my position, refusing to flinch or step back. My expression remained entirely neutral, a stark contrast to her escalating hysteria. "And what exactly will you tell them?" "Harper," I asked, my tone deadly calm, "what narrative do you intend to broadcast? I will tell the world the truth." She spat, her eyes gleaming with a malicious, desperate light. "I will tell them that Chloe Evans, the esteemed high-powered wealth management advisor, preyed on a vulnerable, terrified young woman suffering from severe postpartum depression. I will tell them you utilized your financial leverage to coerce a struggling mother into signing away her rights. I will say, you bought a human being to fulfill your twisted savior complex." She leaned closer, her breath hot against my cheek. "The internet loves a villain, Chloe. They love tearing down successful, wealthy women who exploit the vulnerable. They will not care about the fine print of a settlement agreement. They will care about a crying mother who was forced to sell her baby to pay off debts. I will launch a smear campaign so massive your firm will have no choice but to terminate your employment to save their reputation. Your clients will pull their portfolios. Your career will be annihilated." The threat hung in the air, toxic and heavy. In the digital age, a viral smear campaign, regardless of its factual accuracy, possessed the power to inflict catastrophic professional damage. As a senior wealth manager, my entire livelihood hinged on unassailable integrity, discretion, and public trust. The mere accusation of predatory behavior, especially involving the purchase of a child from a vulnerable family member, could trigger an aggressive internal investigation by my firm. It could prompt high-net-worth clients to seek alternative counsel. Harper understood the vulnerability of a reputation built on trust, and she intended to weaponize it. But Harper was not executing a calculated public relations strategy. She was a desperate animal lashing out, attempting to extort a settlement through intimidation. And she was making a critical, fatal error in her delivery. "You can prevent all of this," Harper continued, dropping her voice to a conspiratorial whisper. "You can save your career. You can keep the boy. You can keep your perfect little family intact. All you have to do is compensate me for my silence." The demand finally materialized, raw and ugly. The underlying motive for the entire ambush was laid bare. $3 million, Harper demanded. Her eyes locked onto mine. "You hold the fiduciary authority over the Hayes Trust. You have direct access to $12 million of liquid capital. Wire $3 million into my primary checking account by the end of business on Monday. Give me my cut and I will disappear. I will never contact you, Marcus, or the boy again. But if the money is not in my account by 5 p.m. on Monday, I hit publish and I burn your entire life to the ground." The silence that followed her ultimatum was absolute. It was not the silence of shock or intimidation. It was the profound, heavy silence that descends immediately after a catastrophic mistake is made. Harper stood tall, her chin lifted, assuming she had delivered a checkmate. She believed the threat of public ruin would force me to capitulate. She expected me to panic, to negotiate, to beg for a lower figure. She completely forgot she was not the only person in the room. I did not respond to her demand. I did not attempt to reason with her or point out the impossibility of embezzling $3 million from a heavily audited trust fund. I simply shifted my gaze, looking past my sister's shoulder toward the heavy oak door of the bridal suite. The two police officers had observed the entire exchange. They had listened to the fraudulent custody claims. They had heard the audio recording detailing perjury and a conspiracy to commit fraud. Now they stood as direct witnesses to a blatant, unambiguous criminal act. The lead officer, the tall man with the rigid jawline, exchanged a sharp, significant glance with his partner. The second officer nodded, once his hand moving smoothly from his hip to unfasten the leather strap securing his handcuffs. Harper's threat was not a civil dispute over a broken contract. It was not a heated family argument involving harsh words. By explicitly demanding a $3 million payout in exchange for withholding damaging reputation, destroying allegations, Harper had crossed a definitive legal threshold. In the state of Illinois, threatening to expose a secret or launch a smear campaign intended to subject an individual to hatred, contempt, or ridicule for the explicit purpose of obtaining money or property is the textbook definition of extortion. It is a Class 3 felony. The officers did not require a warrant. They did not need to wait for an investigation or a grand jury indictment. The crime had occurred in their presence. They had probable cause verbal confirmation and multiple witnesses. The lead officer stepped forward, closing the distance between himself and Harper. The heavy tread of his tactical boots against the hardwood floor shattered the silence. "Ma'am, I need you to place your hands behind your back," the officer instructed, his voice carrying the hard, uncompromising authority of the law. Harper spun around, her triumphant expression dissolving into sheer, unadulterated shock as she found herself face to face with the approaching officer. She stumbled backward, bumping into the marble vanity. "What? No, wait. We are just negotiating. It is a family dispute. I was angry. I did not mean it." The officer did not pause. He reached out, gripping her wrist with a firm, practiced hold, twisting her arm behind her back. "You are not negotiating, Mom. You are committing a felony," the officer stated flatly. The metallic click of the handcuffs ratcheting closed echoed sharply in the bridal suite. "You are under arrest for extortion." Harper let out a high, panicked shriek. The reality of the cold steel biting into her wrists shattered her remaining delusion. The untouchable golden child, the woman who had skated through life shielded by maternal checkbooks and false narratives, was finally facing a consequence she could not manipulate or charm her way out of. "Mom, do something. Tell them," Harper screamed, twisting her body in a futile attempt to break the officer's hold. She looked frantically toward Beverly, expecting the familiar intervention, the immediate defense. But Beverly remained pinned against the wall, paralyzed by her own mounting legal peril. My mother could not save her. My mother could not even save herself. The alliance was dead, and the extortion attempt was the final nail in the coffin. The ambush was over, but the reckoning was far from finished. The architect of the fraudulent mandate was about to discover the price of his participation. The sharp metallic ratcheting of the handcuffs echoing in the bridal suite served as a brutal, undeniable punctuation mark to Harper's extortion attempt. The untouchable golden child, who had spent 27 years navigating the world, consequence-free, now stood restrained by a county police officer. Her panicked shrieks bounced off the floral arrangements, a stark contrast to the elegant ambiance the room was designed to project. Trent Sterling, the elite probate attorney, remained frozen near the doorway. He had halted his exit when my voice cut through his retreat, demanding he face the consequences of the fraudulent mandate he had filed. He had watched the extortion unfold with mounting horror. He was a ruthless litigator, a man accustomed to aggressive courtroom tactics and hard-nosed negotiations. But he was not a criminal defense attorney, and he had just witnessed his client commit a blatant, unambiguous felony in the presence of armed law enforcement. Harper's demand for a $3 million payoff was not just illegal. It was a catastrophic strategic blunder that annihilated any remaining shred of credibility her case possessed. It validated my assertion that the entire custody ambush was a sophisticated, high-stakes financial fraud, and Trent was listed as the attorney of record on the documents executing that fraud. In the legal profession, self-preservation is an absolute imperative. An attorney's license, their reputation, and their livelihood depend on maintaining a clear, defensible boundary between zealous advocacy and complicity in criminal acts. Trent recognized the radioactive fallout radiating from Harper's actions. If he remained tethered to her defense, he would be dragged down in the impending Bar Association investigation and the inevitable civil litigation initiated by the Hayes family estate. He needed to sever ties immediately and publicly. He needed to establish an unassailable record demonstrating he was an unwitting victim of his client's deception, not a co-conspirator. Trent stepped away from the door, raising his hands in a gesture of profound, unambiguous surrender. The arrogant, commanding posture he had wielded upon entering the venue was entirely gone. He adopted the careful, measured demeanor of a man attempting to de-escalate a volatile situation while simultaneously throwing his client under the proverbial bus. Officers, Trent announced, projecting his voice clearly, so his statement was documented by the police body cameras. "I need to make a formal on-the-record declaration." The second officer, who was currently securing Harper's secondary wrist into the metal cuffs, paused and looked up. The lead officer nodded, granting the attorney the floor. "I am formally withdrawing as counsel for Harper Evans effective immediately," Trent stated, his tone crisp and legally precise. "I categorically assert that my firm Sterling & Associates was entirely unaware of the finalized adoption decree or the financial settlement agreement executed 3 years ago. Miss Evans deliberately and with malicious intent withheld this material information during our initial consultation." Harper stopped struggling against the officer's hold. She twisted her neck, staring at Trent with wide, betrayed eyes. "Trent, you cannot do this. You are my lawyer. You are supposed to protect me. You told me the emergency order would work." Trent did not look at her. He refused to grant her even a sliver of professional solidarity. He kept his gaze locked firmly on the police officers, ensuring his narrative was cemented in their official report. An attorney-client relationship is predicated on full disclosure and candor. Trent continued, slicing through her desperate plea. Miss Evans knowingly provided fraudulent representations regarding her legal standing. She utilized my firm's resources to perpetrate a fraud upon the court. My firm does not suborn perjury, and we do not facilitate extortion. He turned, slightly shifting his focus to Beverly Evans, who remained pinned against the vanity mirror, paralyzed by the rapid implosion of their conspiracy. Furthermore, Trent added, delivering the decisive lethal blow to the toxic familial alliance. "I am prepared to fully cooperate with law enforcement and the state prosecutor's office regarding the origins of the emergency mandate. I will provide all documentation, communication logs, and internal firm memos demonstrating that Beverly Evans supplied the false testimony utilized to secure the ex parte order. She swore under oath in my presence and the presence of a notary public that the allegations of physical abuse were accurate." Beverly let out a low, strangled cry. The reality of her situation crashed down with crushing force. She was no longer just a mother caught in a domestic dispute. She was a documented perjurer, abandoned by the legal muscle she had relied upon to execute her scheme. The attorney she believed would shield her was actively volunteering to testify against her to save his own career. "I did what you told me to do," Beverly shrieked, pointing an accusing finger at Harper. "You told me the lawyer said we needed an emergency. You told me we needed to move fast before the Hayes lawyers found out. The toxic alliance, built on greed and sustained by years of unchecked entitlement, shattered completely under the pressure of imminent legal consequences. Mother and daughter, who had conspired to destroy my life and steal a child's inheritance, were now actively turning on one another in a frantic, ugly attempt to evade accountability." The lead officer observed the rapid disintegration of the conspiracy with a hardened expression. The situation had escalated far beyond a simple civil custody disagreement. The audio recording provided by Marcus established the financial motive and the conspiracy to commit perjury. Harper's blatant extortion attempt solidified the criminal intent. Trent's formal withdrawal and offer of cooperation provided the necessary corroborating testimony to pursue charges regarding the fraudulent court filings. The trap I had meticulously laid, constructed from legal documentation, undeniable evidence, and unshakable resolve, had snapped shut with flawless precision. Harper Evans, the lead officer, stated, his voice ringing with absolute authority. "You are under arrest for extortion and suspected fraud upon the court. You have the right to remain silent. Anything you say can and will be used against you in a court of law." Harper sagged against the officer's grip, the fight draining from her body, as the Miranda warning echoed in the bridal suite. The reality of her situation, the prospect of an orange jumpsuit instead of a $12 million payout, finally broke through her profound delusion. The second officer turned his attention to my mother. He stepped forward, retrieving a second pair of handcuffs from his duty belt. Beverly Evans, the officer, announced, his tone equally uncompromising. "You are being detained pending a formal investigation into allegations of perjury and conspiracy to commit fraud. Turn around and place your hands behind your back." Beverly's eyes widened in sheer, unadulterated terror. The woman who had prioritized her social standing and her gambling debts above the safety of her grandson, the woman who had viewed law enforcement as a tool to enforce her convenience, was now facing the terrifying reality of the justice system bearing down upon her. "No, please, you cannot do this. I am a grandmother. I am a respected member of the community," Chloe tell them. "Tell them this is a mistake." She looked at me, her eyes pleading for the salvation she had denied me for 32 years. She expected me to cushion the impact, to intervene, and protect her from the consequences of her own actions. She expected the shock absorber to perform her designated function. I looked at the woman who birthed me. I felt no pity. I felt no obligation. I felt a profound, clarifying emptiness. "You made your choices, Beverly," I said quietly, my voice steady and resolute. "Now you will face the consequences." The metallic click of the second pair of handcuffs ratcheting closed sealed the fate of the Evans family conspiracy. The ambush had been repelled. The threat to my son, my fiancé, and my freedom had been neutralized. But the final, most devastating stage of their public humiliation was about to commence. The guests in the chapel were waiting, and the exit strategy required passing through the very crowd they had attempted to manipulate. The metallic click of the handcuffs securing Beverly's wrists echoed with a hollow finality in the bridal suite. The room, designed for joyful preparation and pre-wedding toasts, had transformed into a sterile holding cell. The air, previously thick with the scent of expensive floral arrangements and aggressive demands, now held the sharp, cold reality of impending incarceration. The two police officers adjusted their grips on their respective detainees. The swift escalation from a tense domestic dispute to a documented felony arrest required immediate processing. "Officers," the lead patrolman stated, addressing his partner while keeping a firm hold on Harper's arm, "we are going to escort the suspects to the patrol vehicles. I will radio dispatch to request a transport unit for the older female. We will process them at the district precinct." He turned his attention to me, his tone shifting back to professional neutrality. "Miss Evans, an investigator from the prosecutor's office, will contact you regarding the extortion charges and the fraudulent court filings. We will also need a copy of that audio recording your fiancé presented." Marcus nodded, his posture relaxed but attentive. "I will have our legal counsel transmit the encrypted file directly to the lead detective's secure server by tomorrow morning," he confirmed. The officer acknowledged the protocol with a brief nod. He looked toward the heavy oak door of the bridal suite, assessing the logistics of the extraction. "We will utilize the secondary service corridor," he instructed his partner. "It leads directly to the loading dock. We can bypass the main chapel and avoid agitating the guests further." It was standard police procedure. Law enforcement generally prefers to minimize public spectacles, prioritizing a quiet, controlled exit over a chaotic procession through a crowded venue. It was a tactical decision designed to de-escalate tension and maintain operational security. But I was not interested in operational security. I was not interested in allowing the women who had attempted to destroy my life weaponize the justice system against my fiancé and steal my child's inheritance to slip out through a back door shrouded in protective anonymity. For 32 years, Beverly Evans had meticulously cultivated an image of unblemished suburban perfection. She operated within a social ecosystem where reputation was currency. She prioritized optics above authenticity, attending charity galas, hosting neighborhood fundraisers, and projecting an aura of refined, untouchable elegance. She had weaponized that very reputation to secure the fraudulent emergency mandate, relying on the assumption that a judge would inherently trust a respected grandmother over a fabricated narrative of abuse. If she exited through the service corridor, the guests in the chapel would only know that the disruption had been handled. Beverly would undoubtedly construct a new elaborate lie to explain her absence. She would spin a tale of tragic misunderstanding, painting herself as a martyr who sacrificed her own comfort to protect a troubled daughter. She would manipulate the narrative, preserving her social standing while quietly dealing with the legal fallout. I refused to grant her that luxury. True accountability required exposure. "Officer," I interjected, stepping forward to intercept their path toward the secondary exit. My voice remained steady, projecting the unwavering authority I utilized when dictating terms in high-stakes corporate negotiations. "I must request that you utilize the primary exit through the main chapel." The lead officer frowned, his brow furrowing in confusion. "Ma'am, that is not standard protocol. Transporting suspects through a populated event space presents unnecessary logistical challenges and potential security risks. The service corridor is the safest route for all parties involved. There are no security risks in that chapel," I countered, maintaining eye contact. "The individuals seated in that room are my family, my colleagues, and my friends. They have been waiting patiently for the resumption of this ceremony. They witnessed the initial disruption orchestrated by these women. It is imperative that they witness the resolution." I paused, allowing the weight of my request to settle. Furthermore, I added, lowering my voice slightly to ensure the impact of my words landed precisely where intended. "The paternal grandparents of the minor child are currently seated in the second row. They are the primary benefactors of the trust fund these women attempted to defraud. They have a vested legal interest in understanding the nature of the threat that was neutralized today." The officer hesitated, assessing the situation. He recognized the underlying demand. I was not asking for a favor. I was exercising my right as the victim of a crime occurring on property I had rented, demanding transparency regarding the perpetrators. "Very well," the officer conceded, prioritizing compliance from the cooperative party. "We will proceed through the main thoroughfare. Maintain a clear path." Beverly's eyes widened in sheer, unadulterated panic. The prospect of facing a judge or an aggressive prosecutor paled in comparison to the terror of facing her social peers in handcuffs. The service corridor represented a quiet, manageable disaster. The main aisle represented total, irrevocable social annihilation. "Chloe, please." "No," Beverly begged, her voice cracking, stripped of all its former arrogance. "You cannot do this. The Hendersons are out there. The mayor's wife is out there. Do not humiliate me in front of my friends. I will do whatever you want. I will apologize. I will retract the affidavit. Just let us go out the back." I looked at the woman who had birthed me, feeling a profound, clarifying emptiness. She was not begging for forgiveness for attempting to frame Marcus for child abuse. She was not expressing remorse for aiding Harper in a plot to steal Leo's inheritance. She was only begging to protect her ego. "You should have considered your social standing before you committed perjury to facilitate a $12 million theft," I stated coldly. "The truth is no longer a private family matter, Beverly. You made it public the moment you walked into my wedding and demanded my son. Now you will face the audience you gathered." The officers did not wait for further debate. They adjusted their grips on the suspects and pushed open the heavy oak door of the bridal suite. The transition from the tense, claustrophobic atmosphere of the holding room to the expansive, brightly lit chapel was jarring. The string quartet had ceased playing, leaving a heavy, expectant silence hovering over the 150 guests. Conversations had died down, replaced by anxious whispers and confused glances toward the back of the venue. As the heavy wooden doors swung wide, the entire congregation turned in unison. The visual impact was devastating and absolute. Harper Evans, the prodigal daughter, who had dramatically interrupted the ceremony in a designer silk slip dress, emerged first. Her arms were secured tightly behind her back, the silver handcuffs gleaming under the chapel lights. Her carefully applied makeup was smudged, her posture defeated. Directly behind her walked Beverly Evans, the matriarch who had stood up moments earlier to proudly welcome her daughter's return. now shuffled forward with her head bowed, weeping uncontrollably as the second police officer guided her by the elbow. Her wrists, too, were bound in steel. A collective audible gasp rippled through the chapel. The sound was not a murmur of sympathy, but a sharp, visceral reaction of profound shock. I walked out of the bridal suite a few paces behind the police escort, my arm linked securely with Marcus. We did not rush. We did not display anger or triumph. We projected an aura of unshakable, unified resilience. The officers guided Harper and Beverly down the center aisle, the very path I was meant to walk to begin my new life. They passed rows of pristine white hydrangeas and elegant floral arrangements. They passed colleagues from my wealth management firm executives, from Marcus's cybersecurity company, and friends who had witnessed my years of sacrifice raising Leo. But the most critical audience sat in the second row. Arthur and Elaine Hayes, the formidable old money patriarch and matriarch of the Hayes real estate empire, watched the procession with expressions carved from granite. They were Julian's parents. They were Leo's biological grandparents. And they were the individuals who had contacted my firm earlier that week, trusting me to act as the fiduciary for their grandson's vast inheritance. They had attended the wedding as a gesture of respect, acknowledging the woman who had stepped in when their own son had failed. Now they were witnessing the brutal reality of the threat that had targeted their family's wealth. As Beverly passed their row, she made the catastrophic mistake of lifting her head. Her tear-streaked eyes met Elaine Hayes' icy, unforgiving stare. Elaine did not offer a word of comfort. She simply turned her head away in blatant, undisguised disgust. It was the ultimate, inescapable consequence. The public humiliation was absolute. Beverly's carefully curated reputation, built over decades of calculated social maneuvering, evaporated in the span of a 60-foot walk down a floral aisle. She was no longer the respected community pillar. She was a documented criminal paraded in handcuffs before the very elite circles she had desperately sought to impress. The ultimate payoff did not require me to shout or hurl insults. It did not require a dramatic cinematic monologue. The most satisfying, complete destruction of the toxic dynamic occurred in silence, driven entirely by the undeniable visual truth of their own actions. The heavy chapel doors closed behind the police escort, shutting out the wail of the departing patrol vehicles. The toxic elements had been excised from the venue, removed by the very authority they had attempted to weaponize. The threat was neutralized, the inheritance secured, and the truth irrevocably established. But the ceremony was not yet complete, and the most important vows were still waiting to be spoken. The heavy wooden doors of the chapel swung shut, muffling the distant wail of the departing police cruisers. Inside, the grand hall remained suspended in a thick, stunned silence. 150 guests sat immobilized, grappling with the unprecedented spectacle they had just witnessed. The scent of white hydrangeas mingled with the lingering electric tension of the conflict. The space, designed for joyous celebration, felt momentarily paralyzed by the weight of the criminal extraction. I stood at the back of the center aisle, the heavy silk of my wedding gown brushing against the polished hardwood. My heart maintained a steady, measured rhythm. I did not feel the urge to collapse or weep. The adrenaline that had fueled my defense during the standoff in the bridal suite slowly dissipated, leaving behind a profound, clarifying stillness. I had neutralized a catastrophic threat to my family, dismantled a complex financial fraud, and permanently severed ties with a toxic bloodline. There were no tears left to shed for individuals who viewed love as a transaction and family as a strategic asset. Marcus stood beside me. He did not ask if I was all right. He did not offer empty platitudes or anxious hovering. He simply understood. He turned his attention to the 5-year-old boy standing near the velvet drapes, wide-eyed and uncertain. Marcus knelt down, his custom tuxedo creasing as he met Leo at eye level. He extended his arms, offering a silent, unwavering promise of safety. Leo did not hesitate. The child rushed forward, throwing his small arms around Marcus's neck and burying his face in the broad shoulder. Dad, Leo whispered the word, muffled against the fabric, but entirely clear in the quiet room. It was the first time Leo had used that word without prompting, without hesitation. It was a spontaneous, genuine recognition of the man who had stayed awake during asthma attacks, the man who had shielded him from a hostile ambush, and the man who had chosen to be his father in every way that mattered. Marcus closed his eyes for a brief second, his powerful frame softening as he held the boy tight. "I got you, buddy," he murmured, his deep voice rumbling with quiet reassurance. "Nobody is taking you anywhere. You are exactly where you belong." He stood up, lifting Leo effortlessly into his arms. The boy rested his head on Marcus's shoulder, his breathing finally slowing to a normal pace. The fear was gone, replaced by the profound security of absolute protection. Marcus looked at me over the boy's head. His dark eyes held a mixture of deep affection and unshakable resolve. "Ready?" He asked a simple question, carrying the weight of a lifetime commitment. I took a deep breath, smoothing the intricate lace on the bodice of my gown. I adjusted my posture, standing tall and projecting the quiet, commanding authority I utilized in high-stakes boardroom negotiations. I was not a victim recovering from trauma. I was a victor claiming my territory. "Always," I replied. I linked my arm through his free arm. Together we stepped forward, beginning the long walk down the center aisle. The silence in the chapel remained unbroken as we moved past the rows of seated guests. I kept my gaze focused straight ahead toward the floral arch waiting at the altar. I did not look for approval or sympathy in the faces of the attendees. I did not need it. We reached the front of the room. The officiant, a seasoned professional who had witnessed countless wedding day disasters, stood waiting with a practiced, neutral expression. To the side, the master of ceremonies hovered near the sound equipment, unsure of how to proceed after the unprecedented interruption. I released Marcus's arm and stepped toward the MC. I extended my hand palm up. The MC blinked in surprise, then quickly handed me the wireless microphone. I turned to face the congregation. I looked out over the sea of faces, my colleagues, Marcus's family, and the friends who had supported me during the grueling years of raising a child alone. I let my eyes rest briefly on Arthur and Elaine Hayes, seated in the second row. They watched me with expressions of profound respect, acknowledging the strength required to protect their grandson's future. I raised the microphone. "I apologize for the delay," I stated. My voice resonated through the chapel speakers, clear, steady, and devoid of any emotional tremor. It carried the undeniable cadence of a woman entirely in control of her environment. A ripple of nervous anticipation moved through the crowd. They expected an explanation, a tearful apology, or perhaps a dramatic recount of the events that had transpired in the bridal suite. They anticipated a bride struggling to salvage a ruined day. I did not offer them a tragedy. Those individuals who did not belong here have been permanently removed. I continued my words, slicing through the remaining tension like a scalpel. The disruption is concluded. The threat is neutralized. I turned my head slightly, looking at Marcus holding Leo. The visual of the strong, protective man cradling the safe, calm child spoke louder than any extensive justification could. "We are not here today to dwell on the past or the actions of those who failed to understand the true meaning of loyalty," I said, returning my focus to the crowd. "We are here to finalize a commitment. We are here to officially recognize the bond that has already existed for years." I lowered the microphone slightly, my tone softening just enough to convey genuine warmth without losing its commanding edge. "So if the quartet would be so kind as to resume playing, we will now proceed with the ceremony. We are ready to begin the celebration of a real family." For a split second, the chapel remained silent, processing the swift, decisive pivot from criminal extraction to joyous continuation. Then the sound broke. It did not start as a polite murmur. It started as a sharp, resounding clap from the second row. Arthur Hayes, the formidable patriarch of the Hayes real estate empire, stood up from his seat. He looked directly at me and brought his hands together in a slow, deliberate applause. His wife Elaine stood beside him, joining the gesture of profound respect. The validation from the high society figures shattered the remaining hesitation in the room. Marcus's parents stood next, cheering loudly for their son and their new grandson. The colleagues from my wealth management firm rose to their feet. The friends who had witnessed my struggles joined the chorus. Within seconds, the entire chapel was standing. 150 guests erupted into a thunderous, overwhelming standing ovation. The applause echoed off the vaulted ceiling, washing away the toxic residue of Harper and Beverly's ambush. It was a deafening endorsement of the boundaries I had set and the family I had chosen. The string quartet jolted back into action, scrambled to raise their instruments. The rich, vibrant notes of a celebratory concerto soared over the applause, filling the space with triumphant energy. I handed the microphone back to the MC. I turned to Marcus. He smiled, a genuine, radiant expression that reached his eyes. He set Leo down gently on the floor. The 5-year-old took his designated place between us, holding his small ring-bearer pillow with renewed solemn pride. I reached out and took Marcus's hands in mine. The officiant opened his book, his voice projecting clearly over the fading applause and the swelling music. The vows we exchanged were not just promises of romantic love. They were declarations of mutual protection, unyielding partnership, and the absolute commitment to the child standing between us. The ceremony concluded flawlessly. The reception that followed was not overshadowed by the earlier drama. Instead, it was infused with an electric, victorious atmosphere. The high-end caterers served the extravagant meal. The open bar flowed generously. The dance floor remained packed well into the night. As I watched Leo laughing while Marcus twirled him around the dance floor surrounded by people who genuinely cared for our well-being, I realized the ultimate truth of the day. The ambush had not ruined my wedding. It had purified it. The hostile extraction had removed the final remnants of obligation and guilt, leaving behind only the pure, unadulterated joy of a life built on solid, undeniable foundations. The toxic elements had been purged, but the legal and financial consequences of their actions were still unfolding. The trap I had laid in the bridal suite was designed to neutralize the immediate threat, but the true payload involved securing Leo's $12 million future against any further predatory claims. The aftermath would require precision legal acumen and a ruthless commitment to ensuring that Harper and Beverly faced the full crushing weight of the justice system. The battle for the day was won, but the war to secure the estate was just beginning. The view from my corner office in downtown Chicago offers a clear, unobstructed sightline over Lake Michigan. I sit at my mahogany desk, reviewing a quarterly yield report. The portfolio belongs to a minor. The principal balance reads slightly over $12 million diversified across index funds, municipal bonds, and commercial real estate holdings. The accounts generate a steady conservative yield designed to compound over the next 13 years. By the time Leo turns 18, the capital will guarantee his financial independence for a lifetime. Arthur and Elaine Hayes finalized the trust architecture 3 weeks after the wedding. They did not require a court order to appoint me as the primary fiduciary. They utilized their own high-powered legal team to bypass standard probate delays, creating an irrevocable structure impervious to outside claims. The paperwork sits in my locked filing cabinet, a physical manifestation of a secured perimeter. The perpetrators who attempted to breach that perimeter found themselves facing the severe, unforgiving machinery of the criminal justice system. Harper did not receive the lenient treatment she expected. Her entire life, our mother had purchased her way out of consequences, but Beverly lacked the funds to hire a defense team, and the state prosecutor assigned to the extortion case was ambitious. Harper's defense crumbled before it even reached a courtroom. Trent Sterling, desperate to salvage his law license and avoid disbarment for facilitating fraud, accepted a plea deal. He turned state's evidence. He handed over every email, every billing record, and a sworn deposition detailing how Harper and Beverly conspired to fabricate the abuse allegations. Faced with her own lawyer testifying against her, the audio recording of her financial conspiracy, and the arresting officers providing statements regarding the extortion attempt, Harper pleaded guilty. The judge did not offer probation. She sentenced my sister to 24 months in a state correctional facility. The woman who once prioritized luxury vacations and designer wardrobes now wears standard-issue canvas and adheres to a rigid institutional schedule. Beverly's downfall was less cinematic, but far more agonizing for a woman obsessed with optics. The criminal investigation into her perjury is still pending, delayed by bureaucratic backlogs, but her financial ruin arrived with brutal efficiency. The $200,000 gambling debt she discussed on the recorded phone call was very real. Her illegal bookmaker did not care about her legal troubles. When the anticipated payout from Leo's inheritance failed to materialize, her creditors moved in. She attempted to leverage her social connections to secure a short-term loan. She quickly discovered that high society possesses a very low tolerance for scandal. Arthur and Elaine Hayes quietly ensured that the details of the wedding ambush circulated through the elite circles of Chicago. Beverly found her memberships revoked. The charity boards asked for her resignation. Her peers stopped returning her calls. Without access to my monthly financial support, she defaulted on her mortgage. The bank initiated foreclosure proceedings 90 days later. She filed for Chapter 7 bankruptcy, forced to liquidate her assets and vacate the sprawling suburban home she utilized as a status symbol. I know these details because Beverly outlines them in the letters she sends to my office. They arrive in thin white envelopes filled with pages of frantic, shifting narratives. In one paragraph, she blames Harper for deceiving her. In the next, she begs me to remember our blood connection, demanding a financial rescue. She writes about the indignity of renting a small apartment and the cruelty of her former friends. I do not read them past the first few lines. I instructed my administrative assistant to intercept and shred any correspondence bearing her return address. I do not visit Harper in the state penitentiary. I do not answer calls from unidentified numbers. Society often pushes a dangerous narrative regarding biological relatives. People insist that blood ties require infinite forgiveness. They demand reconciliation, claiming that you only get one mother or one sister, implying that shared DNA serves as a universal pardon for cruelty. I reject that premise entirely. Biology is an accident of birth. It is a roll of the genetic dice. It does not grant anyone a license to exploit, manipulate, or destroy you. Real family is not defined by a birth certificate. Real family is defined by consistent, reliable action. Family consists of the people who stand between you and a threat. It is the people who prioritize your safety over their convenience. Marcus shielding a terrified boy behind velvet drapes is family. Arthur and Elaine Hayes funding a trust to protect their grandson's future is family. I close the financial folder on my desk and secure it in the drawer. The workday is over. I leave the glass and steel tower driving through the city traffic toward the suburban neighborhood where Marcus and I purchased a home last month. It sits on a quiet, tree-lined street, far removed from the toxicity of my past. I walk through the front door. The scent of roasted garlic and rosemary fills the hallway. Marcus stands in the kitchen wearing a casual sweater, stirring a pot on the stove. He looks up and smiles, a genuine expression of warmth that grounds me instantly. Through the sliding glass doors, I look out into the backyard. Leo is running across the grass, chasing a golden retriever mix we adopted from a local shelter. The boy's laughter rings out clear and unburdened. He is 6 years old now. He is thriving in kindergarten. He has friends, a routine, and a stable foundation. He does not know about the fraudulent custody order. He does not know about the woman in the silk dress who tried to drag him away, or the grandmother who viewed him as a bargaining chip to settle a gambling debt. He does not know about the $12 million waiting for him, and he will not know until he is old enough to understand the responsibility that accompanies wealth. All Leo knows is that he has a mother who tucks him in every night and a father who teaches him how to throw a baseball on Sunday afternoons. He knows his home is a fortress where monsters are not allowed to enter. Harper and Beverly plotted to hijack a fortune by exploiting a child. They ended up losing their freedom, their assets, and their social standing. They engineered their own destruction through greed and arrogance. I did not have to seek revenge. I simply held the line, enforced the law, and protected my own. I watch my son tackle the dog in the soft evening light, safe, happy, and entirely ignorant of the darkness we defeated. That is not just a successful legal defense. That is absolute victory. Looking back at the shattered remains of the Evans family dynamic, I realize that the most profound victories do not occur in courtrooms or during dramatic confrontations. They happen in the quiet moments after the storm clears. When I sit on my patio and watch Marcus teach Leo how to ride a bicycle without training wheels, I understand the true magnitude of what we defended. The chaos my mother and sister brought into my wedding chapel was designed to break me, but it only crystallized the rules I now live by. I walked away from that wreckage with 3 distinct truths. First, biology is a logistical detail, not a moral obligation. Society conditions us to forgive egregious offenses simply because the perpetrator shares our genetic code. Toxic individuals weaponize that societal guilt. They expect you to tolerate manipulation, theft, and perjury because family is supposed to stick together. I learned to sever that connection without a fraction of hesitation. You owe zero loyalty to people who view your existence as a resource to be exploited. Second emotional responses are a vulnerability, but preparation is an impenetrable shield. When Harper and Beverly stormed my venue with a fraudulent legal mandate, they anticipated tears, panic, and submission. They relied on shock value. I defeated them because I relied on documentation. I secured the adoption decree. Marcus secured the network audio. We built a fortress of verifiable facts. When dealing with predators, you do not argue with their delusions. You quietly assemble the evidence required to dismantle their reality. Third, the ultimate form of retribution is an inaccessible, thriving life. My mother and sister destroyed their own futures chasing a windfall they had not earned. They sit in prison cells and rented rooms consumed by the consequences of their greed. I do not spend my days plotting further vengeance or dwelling on their misery. My revenge is my peace. My revenge is a thriving wealth management career, a strong marriage, and a little boy who goes to sleep every night feeling entirely safe. Withholding your energy from those who wish to drain it is the most devastating consequence you can inflict. We all face moments where the people closest to us attempt to cross our boundaries. You have the right to lock the door. You have the right to protect your peace. If my journey resonated with you, I want to hear your perspective. Have you ever had to draw a hard line against a toxic relative to protect your own future? Drop your thoughts in the comments below. Let us build a community of people who refuse to be victims of their own bloodlines. Make sure to hit the like button, subscribe to the channel, and turn on notifications so you never miss an update. Thank you for listening to Olivia Stories Revenge. Remember, the best way to win a toxic game is to refuse to play by their rules.